Chapter 69. Ning Chen still didn't agree to Prince Yu's request. However, Prince Yu wasn't in a hurry this time. He was sure that Ning Chen had no other choice but to rely on him. Ning Chen could only snort at this. However, what surprised him was the confidence that Prince Yu deliberately revealed. If it wasn't a bluff, then Prince Yu's hidden strength was something he had to pay attention to. In the Grand Xia, there were only a handful of people who could contend with a Marquis. Prince Yu actually had such confidence. It seemed that he had to find an opportunity to stab him again. Otherwise, if he really became powerful, wouldn't the Grand Xia erupt with internal and external troubles? In the next 2 days, Ning Chen and Ah Man didn't leave the residence. Prince Yu and Marquis Yu also didn't make any movements. Ning Chen was waiting for Prince Yen to return, while Prince Yu and Marquis Yu were waiting for his reply. Marquis Yu was indeed a very tolerant person. Ning Chen was ashamed of his own inferiority. If someone dared to slap him in the face, he would definitely slap them first. The thing in his hand was a life-saving talisman. Emperor Xia wanted it, Marquis Yu wanted it, and Prince Yu also wanted it. The only difference was that the three of them had different methods. Emperor Xia's methods were the most intense. If he couldn't get it, then he would destroy it. It didn't matter if he couldn't get it, but he couldn't lose control. Marquis Yu's methods were slightly more moderate. He used a deal to force Ning Chen to reply, although the deal was essentially a lie. In comparison, Prince Yu's attitude was the best. He had always been thinking of ways to get Ning Chen to do him a favor. Emperor Xia's goal was very obvious. Now, he still couldn't see through Marquis Yu. As a Marquis of the Grand Xia, why was he so concerned about the explosives? Was he loyal to the emperor? This didn't make sense. Even Emperor Xia himself wasn't determined to get it. He was just a Marquis. Being so patient was really too much. He really wanted to go over and blow it up again to see how patient Marquis Yu was. If he wasn't wrong, Marquis Yu had surely pledged loyalty to a prince in secret, and his actions were precisely to fight for bargaining chips for this prince. Emperor Xia was already old, and he worked hard for many years. His body had long since reached the end of its life, and he wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. It was only a matter of time before the officials took sides, and Wu Hou was no exception. It was just that he could not tell which Prince Yu was loyal to. The eldest prince, the third prince, or the 10th prince. In any case, it would not be that short-lived 8th prince. Ning Chen now knew why Prince Yen had returned to the palace. It was Prince Yu who had told him. Emperor Xia was suspicious, and the situation was not good for Prince Yen. But Ning Chen believed that the elder would return. If he said 7 days, it would be 7 days. Almost 4 days had passed, and there were only 3 days left. In the small courtyard, Ning Chen sat facing the moon. He closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. Little bits of light flew into his body. Inside the chi vortex in his dantian, there was a beautiful silver light. It was as vast as the ocean. His Jin Qi spiraled like the 9 heavens, flowing through his meridians and veins throughout his body. His mortal body contained the potential of a dragon. The human body's treasury was immeasurably deep. Suddenly, a blood-colored sword light cut through the void. It was as if it came from the 9 heavens. It was incomparably swift and fierce. It was aimed at Ning Chen's heart. At the same time, Ning Chen's eyes suddenly opened. The silver light flourished. His left hand made an empty gesture, and his right hand waved. A vast palm energy roared out. The silver light turned into the hand of a death god and attacked the assassin's right chest. It was a move that risked his life for his opponent's life. There was no turning back. The sword light subconsciously paused for a moment. However, that moment of indecision was enough. In a battle of life and death, there was no room for hesitation. Ning Chen's wheelchair quickly turned, and he narrowly avoided the attack. Qi! The sword entered his body. Blood blossomed. In an instant, Ning Chen's right hand slapped towards the black figure. His palm energy gushed out. The silver light was dazzling, and the person and the sword were sent flying. After the first attack failed, the black figure used another killer move. A golden sword appeared in his left hand. The two swords drew the moon. His martial arts increased by another 30%. He stomped on the ground, and his afterimages flew out. The sharp sword light covered an area of 10 feet. Ning Chen's face looked serious. An inch to the right of his heart, blood dripped down and dyed half of his plain clothes red. Before the sword reached him, he retreated quickly. His left hand flipped rapidly, and an ancient-looking green bow appeared. He bent the bow and put an arrow on it. The silver arrow broke through the void. It was as if it was breaking through dry weeds. The void shook, and there were signs of instability. The sudden arrow was only the beginning. Ning Chen waved his right hand again, and an even more frightening silver arrow appeared. He bent the bow and put the arrow on it. It was so decisive that it made people's hair stand on end. With a whoosh, the arrow was shot out. It followed the trajectory of the previous arrow at an extremely fast speed. The space finally couldn't bear it anymore. It shook violently. The tip of the arrow tore open the void with an ear-piercing friction sound. However, it was not over yet. Ning Chen made another move. The third arrow. Ning Chen's face was unprecedentedly serious. He pulled his right hand again. On the broken death bow, a silver light roared crazily. The wind blew, and the ground under him shook violently. The bow was not bent, and the arrow was not shot out. The scene was already frightening. The power of the chasing moon shook the heaven and earth. It also made the injuries in his body unstable. Blood flowed out from the corner of Ning Chen's mouth. His injuries broke out again. At the crucial moment, Ning Chen clenched his teeth and held on. He pulled the third arrow. He allowed the blood and qi in his body to flow out from the cracks on his skin. Boom! The third arrow flew out. It carried an aura that could destroy everything. It swallowed the space in the blink of an eye, and cut open a pitch-black trajectory. Facing the three powerful arrows, the black figure did not panic. He put the two swords together, and in an instant, a blood moon appeared above the swords. The swords reached the sky, and the blood moon shone brightly. The scarlet blood light dyed the night sky. It was a strange scene, and it was bone-chilling. Bang, bang, in the blink of an eye, the silver arrow had arrived. The first arrow pierced through the blood light and traveled 30 meters. It finally dissipated when it was close to the blood moon. The next arrow chased after it and collided with the blood moon. With a bang, the earth shook and dust filled the sky. However, in the midst of the dust, the blood-red light appeared once again. The blood-red moon was dazzling, but it was showing signs of instability. At this moment, the third arrow finally arrived. The terrifying arrow directly shattered the moon, and was about to take one's life. The black figure let out a soft cry of surprise, and the third sword appeared. The three swords joined together, and shattered the arrow light in front of him. The black figure's cultivation had reached the peak of the 9th rank. The powerful pressure made Ning Chen, who was at the center of the pressure, feel powerless. "Who are you?" Ning Chen coughed up a mouthful of blood and asked with difficulty. "Beiman's 4 engraved swords," said the black figure indifferently. "Ha!" Ning Chen smiled bitterly. The first disciple of Beiman Xiantian. When did he provoke such a big trouble? The peak of the 9th rank was not something he could contend against. Today, it would be very difficult for him to escape unscathed. 4 engraved swords moved again. The blood-colored sword light met Ning Chen's face. Ning Chen waved his hand, and with a clang, the ink sword came out of its sheath, blocking the incoming attack. Boom! The huge difference in cultivation caused Ning Chen's body to tremble. Like a cannonball, he flew out and smashed into the wall behind him. Blood dyed his plain clothes. "You're not bad. Unfortunately, you're too young." For engraved swords calmly said. A mere 5th-rank prenatal cultivator was actually able to last this long in his hands. Who in Beimeng wants me dead? Ning Chen coughed up a mouthful of blood and asked. Military advisor. For engraved swords replied. Ha! Ning Chen struggled to get up and returned to his wheelchair. It turned out that the most powerful military advisor in Beimeng had also noticed him. He had been too careless. He had only set his sights on Xia and neglected the powerful country in the far north. Are you done with your last words? Go on your way. After saying that, For engraved sword's figure flashed. The sword in his hand moved and he quickly rushed over. It was an unavoidable and unblockable sword strike. Ning Chen was powerless to block it. At this moment, a beautiful figure appeared and blocked in front of him without any hesitation. She was like a moth flying into a flame, and she had no regrets. No! Ning Chen's pupils fiercely shrank as he painfully shouted. However, everything was too late. The sword pierced through his body, bringing with it a large amount of blood. A man looked at Ning Chen in front of her. A final trace of gentleness flashed through her eyes. Blood flowed out of her mouth as she said, "You must live." Her body gradually softened. With reluctance, she collapsed in the arms of the person she loved the most in her life. From then on, she would forever remember this feeling. Ah! Ning Chen's heart was in pain. It was so painful that it tore his heart and lungs apart. It was so painful that he couldn't make a sound. Only his body unceasingly trembled. Why is it that people only know how to cherish something when they lose it? In front of the two of them, For engraved swords frowned. He was about to attack again when suddenly, two dazzling rays of light shot over like shooting stars. One was green and the other was red. They slashed towards him. For engraved swords' expression changed. He raised his sword to block. However, in front of such a powerful sword, under the boundless pressure, his mortal body was so small. He was like a small boat in a storm. He instantly sank. Bang! Blood spurted out. For engraved swords was heavily injured and flew back. Before he landed, he turned around and used the momentum to flee. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the night. Within the courtyard, Yan Imperial Prince appeared. He glanced at four engraved swords who had disappeared but didn't chase after him. Cough, cough. Suddenly, intense coughing rang out. Ning Chen was holding a man in his wheelchair. A large amount of blood poured out of his mouth. His injuries had erupted, triggering the old injuries from a few days ago. New injuries and old injuries had completely spread. Yan Imperial Prince's expression changed when he saw that. He instantly arrived next to Ning Chen and placed his hand on his back. A tide of energy poured into him, forcibly suppressing the terrifying injuries that had erupted. Senior, save our man. Ning Chen pushed his hand, stopping Yan Imperial Prince from continuing to pour in his qi. Chapter 70. Let me think about it. Seeing Ning Chen's miserable state, Prince Yan couldn't bear it. He went forward and sealed all the acupuncture points on a man's body to protect his last breath. However, his heart meridian was destroyed and it was difficult to save a Xiantian cultivator. This was a fact that everyone knew. Even if he recovered his Xiantian cultivation now, he couldn't change this fact. Innate qi was not omnipotent. Everything in the world had its own laws. It was not that there were no things that could go against the heavens and change one's fate, but they were extremely rare. A mortal's heart meridian was the place where their essence qi was concentrated. Even the Dantian sea of qi could not be compared to it. If the sea of qi was broken, at most, one's cultivation would be crippled. As long as treatment was timely, one's life could be saved. However, if the heart meridian was destroyed, no one could do anything. A man was not a Xiantian and had yet to break free from the limitations of her mortal body. To change her fate was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Please. Ning Chen kowtowed while coughing up blood. His face was covered in blood, and his hair was disheveled. He was in a sorry state. Suddenly, Prince Yen frowned as if he had thought of something, but he hesitated. The mournful sounds did not stop. She kowtowed to the ground again and again. She kowtowed to the ground and also to Prince Yan's heart. After a long time, he sighed softly and said, "The only chance is to go to Blue Frost Valley and find the water caltrip flower." Ningchen abruptly raised his head, his eyes filled with shock. He had heard of this place before. It was an extremely cold place in the northwest of the Grand Xia. Snow fell all year round and not a single blade of grass grew there. How could there be a so-called caltrip flower here? You'll understand once you get there. But listen to my advice. If things don't work out, don't force yourself. Prince Yan's voice carried a rare heaviness. The water caltrip flower was hard to find in the world. It could only grow in Blue Frost Valley. However, this glimmer of hope could cost Ningchen his life. This was the reason why he was hesitating just now. This method could be said to have a slim chance of survival for the current Ningchen. According to the latter's character, it was utterly impossible for him to give up. "Thank you for your guidance, Senior." Ningchen nodded. Immediately after, he begged again, "Senior, please remove the seal on the heaven-changing pill in my body." Now, he no longer had the time to recuperate. In fact, with his current condition, whether or not he could make it to Azure Frost Valley alive was another matter. Prince Yen sighed deeply. He formed a sword with his right hand and pointed it at the former Sea of Qi. Immediately after, a wave of violent medicinal power exploded, destroying everything in its path. While it healed the wounds, it also caused even more damage. In the next moment, Ningchen circulated the life scroll and forcefully absorbed the huge amount of medicinal energy. His cultivation instantly broke through the dangerous barrier and rose from the 5th grade of the natal realm to the 7th grade. The silver light flickered, and the Sea of Qi in his dantian was filled with raging waves. Although it continued to expand, it actually showed signs of collapsing. Ugh! Ningchen let out a pained groan. Blood dripped from his mouth without end. The pain of increasing his cultivation at the cost of destroying his own potential was indescribable. It was as if 1,000 blades were scraping his bones, and every single blade was painful to the bone marrow. After his cultivation improved, Ningchen immediately endured the pain all over his body and suppressed the internal injuries with all his strength. Prince Yen sighed again. Unknowingly, he had sighed more times than he had in the past 10 years. If one took love lightly, it would hurt others. If one took it too seriously, it would hurt oneself. A man valued love, so she had no regrets. Ningchen valued love, so he had to endure the pain of 1,000 blades. Go in peace. Before you return, even if I have to sacrifice my entire life's cultivation, I will protect a man's last bit of life. Prince Yen looked at Ningchen and made a promise. After saying that, Prince Yen thought carefully and added, "Also, there is heartbreak grass in the palace. It is extremely poisonous, but it can catalyze blood qi. It will be useful for you. Take some with you. Again, if you can't do it, don't force it." "Thank you, Senior." Ningchen kowtowed heavily. If there was a future, he would repay this kindness with all his might. In the northwest of the Grand Xia, a cold moon hung high in the sky. Suddenly, a carriage sped forward, drawing a crazy shadow. A black horse and a black carriage madly rushed through the wasteland. In front of Azure Frost Valley, a snowy sword was placed horizontally in the wind and snow. The tip of the sword was dripping with blood. Frost constantly struck the sword throughout the year. Next to it, a youth was half lying down. He wore a black cloak. His face was handsome, and his eyes were half closed. There was not a trace of human emotion in them. The lonely swordsman had blocked the path forward. Ningchen arrived in front of the valley and stopped the carriage. He requested, "I am Ningchen. Please give me a caltrip crystal flower. If you take one step forward, I'll kill you." The youth's eyes didn't move, but his lips were filled with the most ruthless killing intent. His words had no meaning. The path forward was blocked. Ning Chen had no choice but to turn his wheelchair and force his way through. At the same time, in front of Azure Frost Valley, the snow sword flew up and spun in the air, bringing with it a waterfall of snowflakes. Within the snowflakes, the youth stood up. His body moved, and his sword moved. His cold sword and handsome eyes were cold. Suddenly, Ning Chen felt his body stagnate. He didn't have time to think. Relying on his peerless foundation, he met the sharp sword head-on. Clang! The two swords collided, causing the sky to be filled with snow. The snow sword showed no mercy. It changed its style again and chopped down. The ink sword also condensed frost, following the snow sword like a shadow. The youth who wasn't good at fighting before had to learn to fight these days. Now that he had something to worry about, he naturally wasn't as fearless as before. In Azure Frost Valley, the two strong cultivators were fighting. Killing intent was biting cold. Azure Frost Valley had a suppressive effect on cultivation, but the foundation created by the life scroll was unparalleled. Ning Chen was not afraid. His moves were not affected at all. The youth was very strong. In this Azure Frost Valley, both of their cultivations were suppressed. The battle of moves and foundation became the key. However, even so, Ning Chen didn't dare to be careless. His opponent's strength was beyond his imagination. His sword moves were modeled, but they didn't seem to be evil. The changing sword moves were hard to predict. His moves were blocked. Ning Chen gave up on his weakness and used his peerless foundation to protect himself. His unchanging moves met the ever-changing sword move head-on. When the wheelchair took a step forward, the carriage followed. Ning Chen's moves were simple, only to move forward. Your moves are not different. They originate from your peerless foundation and are infused with your own comprehension. There is a kind of dedication to protect, causing me to have the desire to destroy everything. After saying that, Mu Qianshang's figure moved again. The snow sword was as fast as lightning, cutting through Ning Chen's defense. The sword pierced straight through his body. Ah! Ning Chen didn't dodge. Blood spurted out from the right side of his chest. He let out a long groan. Cold chi surged around his body. Silver light swept through the wind and snow. The body around the snow sword was quickly frozen. Mu Qianshang frowned. A silver light flashed in his devilish eyes. He didn't loosen his grip on the snow sword. His other hand moved and struck towards Ning Chen's chest. Ning Chen endured the pain in his chest and moved his body. He also met the attack with a palm. Boom! A shocking explosion sounded. Between the two, the wind and snow violently swirled. Under Mu Qianshang and Ning Chen, the ground cracked and sank 3 inches deep. Blood dripped down. The two were injured at the same time. In a battle of foundation, no one had the upper hand. However, the moment of injury made Ning Chen unable to trap the snow sword. Mu Qianshang's figure moved. He pulled out the snow sword and waved it. The snow blossomed with a poignant beauty. A bloody light soared into the sky. Half a day's remnant crimson moon. An extreme move combined with an extreme sword. A surge of pressure rushed towards Ning Chen. Mu Qianshang raised his body to the peak and no longer held back. He wanted to end this life and death battle. There was no other choice. There was no way out. Ning Chen used the last of his body's power. In an instant, the sky was filled with snow. Frost surged. In the dazzling world of wind and snow, the ink sword turned into 1,000 and then condensed back into 1. A flying feather, heaven and earth one sword. Extreme move. Ning Chen used his strongest move with his heavily injured body. Immediately, blood spurted out from his body and the world of wind and snow was dyed red. The snow sword slashed through the air. It was breathtaking for a moment, but it suddenly stopped. Mu Qianshang frowned and kept the snow sword behind his back. You are injured. There is no point in this battle. Please return. When the swordsman kept his sword, it meant that the battle was over. Mu Qianshang turned around and walked back into the valley. Ning Chen endured the injuries in his body and begged in a low voice, I am willing to pay any price. I just want a stalk of water caltrip flower. Mu Qianshang stopped and turned around. A glint flashed across his beautiful eyes, any price. Any price. Ning Chen nodded without any hesitation. Stupid. Mu Qianshang snorted and left. In the biting cold wind, a faint voice sounded, come in. Ning Chen followed. The wheelchair turned and behind him, there were only 2 bloodstains left. On the 1,000-zhang-wide ice lake, Mu Qianshang stopped and looked at the white lake. His eyes were emotionless and deep. This is the 1,000-snow lake. The water caltrip flower grows here. You only need to plant your own blood and wait for a moment. However, in the past 1,000 years, only 3 people have succeeded. Whether or not the flower will bear fruit will depend on your luck. After saying that, Mu Qianshang turned to look at Ning Chen and said coldly, let me witness your so-called price. Many thanks. Ning Chen was startled and thanked him. Soon after, he gently cut his finger and a half-inch long cut appeared on his right index finger. Blood dripped down and fell into the snow. He then covered the blood with snow and waited quietly for a while. However, he did not see the slightest movement. Ning Chen was not discouraged. He turned his wheelchair and changed to another place. He continued to plant his own blood and covered it with snow. Then, he waited quietly. Not far away, Mu Qianshang calmly watched all of this. There was not the slightest fluctuation in his eyes. Half a day later, Ning Chen ate the broken heart grass and circulated his cultivation to suppress the injuries that were about to erupt again. The 1,000-snow lake was still peaceful and there was not the slightest change. Ning Chen's right index finger had scabbed over, so he changed to another finger. Half a day later, it scabbed over again. Then, he changed to another finger. 3 days later, all 10 fingers had already scabbed over. Ning Chen frowned slightly and tore open the scab. In order to prevent the wound from scabbing over, he made a deeper cut. There was still no movement on the lake. The blood he planted had not yet borne the water caltrip flower. Ning Chen had the life scroll and his recovery speed was much faster than ordinary people. So, it did not seem to have much effect. Another 4 days later, all 10 fingers had scabbed over again. Moreover, the bleeding from the wound did not seem to be as smooth. Ning Chen ate the broken heart grass again and tore open the scab, still silently planting hope. The 10 fingers were connected to the heart. But now, it did not seem to hurt. Mu Qianshang walked over and looked at Ning Chen, indifferently asking, do you have any last wishes? Ning Chen looked at his right index finger that was no longer bleeding and frowned. He tore open the scab again and said in a hoarse voice, if the water caltrip flower blooms, help me send it to the southern border's Prince Yu's residence. Chapter 71. Half a month later, Ning Chen's hair began to turn white. Not much, but under his black hair, there were strands of snow that could only be seen when the cold wind blew. Blood could no longer flow from his fingers. Tearing off the scabs was the same. Ning Chen cut his right wrist and finally, blood began to flow again. Ning Chen's blood was left all over the lake, but the legendary water caltrip flower still did not appear. On the 20th day, Ning Chen's vitality began to fade. His hair was no longer white but there was still not much white hair. The difference was that no matter if it was black or white, they were all dyed with a touch of lifeless gray. Cough cough. On 1,000-snow lake, Ning Chen was constantly coughing. His internal organs were in intense pain, but recently, he could no longer vomit blood. His cracked skin continued to crack in the cold wind. What seeped out was not blood, but even more cracked bones and flesh. His life that was completely supported by the heaven-reversing pill was gradually reaching its end. The heartbreak grass was becoming less and less effective. At first, it could last for 2 days, but now, it could only last for less than a day. Your vitality has already begun to fade. The possibility of growing a water caltrop flower is already very small. You cannot save him or her, and in the end, you will destroy yourself. Mu Qian Shang came again. Looking at the reddish lake, he calmly said. Ning Chen smiled tiredly, but did not say anything. As long as a man lived, nothing else mattered. A month later, Ning Chen's blood seemed to have run out. His 10 fingers and wrists did not have a single drop of blood left. His fingers, wrists, and blood scabs were once again peeled off. However, after peeling off the scabs, what was left was only white flesh and bone. In fact, Ning Chen should have died long ago. But with the existence of the heaven-reversing pill, he could not die. If it was not for the fact that he could not die, Ning Chen might really not want to live anymore. The cold wind was biting cold. At the entrance of Blue Frost Valley, the lonely swordsman was still lying down. His black and white cloak fluttered in the wind. To the side, the snow sword was placed horizontally on the sword platform. No matter how the wind and frost blew, the tip of the sword would occasionally drip vermilion onto the ground, dyeing the white snow red. Are you going to give up? Mu Qian Shang's half-closed eyes opened. His silver eyes flashed as he softly said. Without blood to plant, how could there be any hope? Suddenly, Mu Qian Shang's body trembled. His bewitching handsome face changed for the first time. Madman looked back coldly, his face full of shock. On the Thousand Snow Lake, Ning Chen's body was surrounded by a silver light. Boundless vitality slowly overflowed from his chest. His black and white hair swayed in the cold wind. In the dazzling light, a drop of abnormally red blood flew out and fell into the snow. Ning Chen's face instantly turned pale, without a trace of blood. This was the essence blood of the heart. Using 1 drop meant 1 drop less. The reason why Ning Chen could hold on until today was all because of his unparalleled foundation. At this moment, forcing out the essence blood of the heart would undoubtedly destroy his own foundation. With a long snort, Ning Chen's vitality dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and everything turned gray. In the next moment, the cultivation of the 7th grade natal stage dropped rapidly, once again returning to the 5th grade natal stage, and it was still dropping. There was not much heartbreak grass left. This time, Ning Chen fainted before he could consume it. Mu Qian Shang was silent, looking at Zhu Yan who was dripping from the snow sword. He did not move. The snow sword that was lying horizontally in the valley was still lying there quietly. It was like a natural moat, blocking the boundary between life and death. Outside the valley, the human world was cold and warm. Inside the valley, the world was cold and cold. No one knew whether Ning Chen was dead or alive. Living was luck, dead was fate. In Prince Yu's residence in the southern border, Prince Yen was extending a man's life day after day. He also waited day after day. After a month, he still hadn't seen a man's figure return. His calm eyes finally flashed with a touch of sadness. It had been more than a month, but he still failed in the end. Prince Yen sent out a letter that he had written long ago. He knew that in this world, Ning Chen only had one elder, Zhang Sun. Therefore, this time, it was time for Zhang Sun to go and see him for the last time. At the same time that the letter was sent out, in the north of Xia, the war between the northern Meng imperial court and Xia that had dragged on for 4 months finally began. After 7 years of recuperation, the northern Meng imperial court strength had reached a peak. This was Fan Lingyue's 7 years of power. The northern Meng imperial court had won the first battle. Xia had deployed their army. More than half of the 100,000 soldiers in the northern plains had died, and they retreated back to Yangue City in a sorry state. The name of the military advisor spread across the world once again. Marquis Beiwu guarded Yangue City, while Marquis Qinghe guarded Xingqiao Pass. They blocked the 2 routes that the northern Meng Iron Cavalry had to take to go south. The Yangue City garrison, together with the 40,000 soldiers that had retreated, had a total of 170,000 soldiers. They faced the northern Meng army head-on. The 100,000 soldiers that Marquis Qinghe brought from Qinghe City were stationed at Xingqiao Pass. They were also on guard, preventing the northern Meng army from going around. A swordsman comprehended the sword. The snow sword flew up and landed in the swordsman's hand. The world of wind and snow changed instantly. An ink painting of mountains and rivers spread out. A waterfall fell from the sky. The tip of the sword pierced the sky. The black mountains and the white water were all in the concept of the sword. The amazing swordsman wrote a legend. Under the waterfall, the swordsman danced. With a slash of his sword, a snow-colored brilliance cut through the waterfall. The rushing water instantly stopped. After a while, the swordsman kept his sword. A cold silver light flashed in his eyes. The ink painting of mountains and rivers quickly dissipated. Green Frost Valley returned to normal. Green Frost Valley, at the center of Thousand Snow Lake. A figure sat on a wheelchair, motionless. Beside him, a beautiful ice flower bloomed in the wind. The dark red flower was as bright as fresh blood. In the wind and snow, it was so beautiful that it shook one's soul. Mu Qianshang slowly walked over. Looking at the caltrip crystal flower on the lake, his expression did not change. With a wave of his hand, the caltrip crystal flower turned into a stream of light and flew into his hand. Outside the valley, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. Mu Qianshang frowned. His figure flashed and disappeared from the center of the lake. From the carved railings of the carriage, a graceful and noble figure walked out. Beside him, a young woman accompanied him. Her gentle and beautiful face had an imperceptible sadness. This empress has come to bring him home. Zhang Sun opened her mouth and walked step by step into the valley. Mu Qianshang's eyes narrowed, but he did not stop her. A jade crown with dragon and phoenix pearls, a golden dragon and phoenix embroidered robe. The person who came was undoubtedly the current empress of the Xia dynasty, Zhang Sun Wuyo. In the center of Thousand Snow Lake, Zhang Sun looked at the sleeping figure in the wheelchair. The sadness in her eyes could no longer be concealed. He can only live a little longer in Blue Frost Valley. Mu Qianshang walked over and reminded her. No need. He has been out for too long. It is time for him to go home. Zhang Sun looked at Ning Chen's gray hair and said indifferently. Qing Ning walked forward, her delicate hands trembling. Her heart was in so much pain that she was speechless. Carefully carrying the ladder, a teardrop unconsciously flowed from her eyes. She softly said, Ning Chen, let's go home. Mu Qianshang did not say anything else. He watched as Zhang Sun and Qing Ning brought Ning Chen away. Time was merciless. In Blue Frost Valley, Mu Qianshang carried the snow sword and left. He headed towards the southern border. The valley was empty, and only the sound of snow could be heard. The bloodstains in the center of Thousand Snow Lake had long been drowned out by the wind and snow. He had promised him that he would send the caltrip crystal flower to the southern border. Northwest of the Xia dynasty, Clear River City. The carved railings of the carriage drove past, heading towards the Clear River Marquis residence. The Clear River Marquis had already sent troops to Xingqiao Pass. Only the Marquis of Taiping was left in charge of the Marquis residence. Furthermore, he would be heading towards the northern border of the Xia dynasty soon. No one could stop this war. The northern Meng imperial court had the existence of a military advisor. He was so powerful that it was shocking. The once insufferably arrogant soldiers of the Xia dynasty were forced to retreat one after another. At this critical moment, bad news came from the western border of the Xia dynasty. The first lord of the Eternal Night sect, Yi Wujuan, appeared in Xiling City in the western border. The Marquis of the blood-clad divine religion tried to stop him. He was heavily injured and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The heavy armored cavalry of the divine religion was led by 3 peak 9th grade generals. Taking advantage of the Marquis of the blood-clad divine religion's heavy injuries, they arrived at Xiling City and would step through the last barrier of the western border of the Xia dynasty at any time. The situation of the Xia dynasty was precarious. The dynasty that had been invincible for 1,000 years was on the verge of collapse. Bad news came one after another. In the heavenly mandate palace, the overworked Emperor Xia vomited blood and fainted. The three dukes who had been ignoring the affairs of the court had no choice but to take charge and stabilize the hearts of the court officials. In the spring of the second year of the new calendar, this was the most difficult time in the history of the Xia dynasty. The Northern Meng imperial court and the Eternal Night sect jointly launched an attack on the Xia dynasty. In the first battle, the Xia dynasty suffered 60,000 casualties and a Marquis was severely injured. This was a humiliation that the Xia dynasty had never experienced in its 1,000 years of history. The war had just begun, but the soldiers and generals had already been defeated. The place where the Marquis of the blood-clad divine religion and the Marquis had been reduced to ruins. The Marquis of the Xia dynasty could be said to be weak, but the Marquis was the most powerful person in the world. The Marquis of the blood-clad divine religion was defeated without any suspense. The undefeated Marquis was still invincible. Few could injure him. He could be said to be the strongest force in the world. With the military advisor in the north and the Marquis in the west, the future of the Xia dynasty seemed to be bleak. The Xia dynasty was showing signs of collapse. The forces that had been intimidated by the Xia dynasty's military strength were beginning to stir. The tigers trying to devour the dragon became an irreversible trend. 3 days later, Mu Qiansheng arrived at the residence of Prince Yu in the southern border. He delivered the caltrip crystal flower and left immediately. When Prince Yan saw the caltrip crystal flower, he had mixed feelings. This flower had bloomed too late. A man's breath had almost completely dissipated. Even if the flower had bloomed, no one knew if it could be saved. Prince Yan placed the caltrip crystal flower in front of a man's severely injured heart. He immediately channeled his vital energy and forced the flower into her heart meridian. In the next moment, the caltrip crystal flower bloomed beautifully. The flower bloomed even more beautifully, dyeing the entire room a demonic blood red. A man still did not wake up. Prince Yan was powerless. He could only continue to use his vital energy to heal her body every day. 2 days later, the king of barbarians arrived. He received the letter sent by a man. When he arrived at the residence of Prince Yu, he realized that he was late. The king of barbarians took a man away. This insufferably arrogant ruler of the barbarian dynasty seemed to have aged 10 years in a day. He was in so much pain that he could not say a word. At the same time, in the residence of Marquis Qinghe, the gray-haired Ning Chen was also lying on the bed. He was motionless. His body was cracked and there was not a single part of his arms that was intact. He looked extremely miserable. Zhang Sun and Qing Ning were quietly guarding by the side. Neither of them said a word. Time only left a name, it was merciless. 2 unconscious figures, one in the barbarian dynasty and the other in Qinghe, were separated by more than 1,000 miles. They should not have met. In the end, they were far away. Chapter 72. In the spring of the second year of the new calendar, Fan Lingyue of the northern Meng imperial court led his army to attack Yangui city. 300,000 soldiers surrounded the city but did not attack. The reinforcements of the Great Xia gathered from all directions. Rations and troops rushed towards Yangui city. 3 days later, the Great Xia Emperor woke up and took charge of the state affairs. He read the battle reports from the north and the west every moment. His old eyes were even colder and more emotionless. 10 days later, a bolt from the blue struck the entire Great Xia. The entire court was shocked. Yangui city was breached in one night. None of the 170,000 soldiers survived. The Marquis of Beiwu was seriously injured and unconscious. This was a huge earthquake. No matter how much the people believed that the Great Xia would not be defeated, they started to panic. In Qinghe city, Zhang Sun was first stunned when she heard the news. Then, she flew into a rage. She had clearly passed the letter to the Great Xia Emperor, but the Great Xia Emperor did not do anything. After Yangue city was breached, the 300,000 soldiers of the northern Meng imperial court chose to massacre the entire city. In just half a day, millions of civilians were slaughtered. Corpses piled up into mountains and blood flowed like rivers. The order was given by the military advisor. The merciless order made the generals feel cold all over. Half a day later, the 300,000 soldiers set off and did not stop at Yangue city. In the west of the Great Xia, Xiling city, which did not have the Marquis of Bloodrobed, was finally taken down by the heavy cavalry of the Celestial Sect after Yangue city was breached. The heavy cavalry of the Celestial Sect was still strong and invincible. The northern Meng army and the heavy cavalry of the Celestial Sect were unstoppable. In an instant, the people in the north and west of the Great Xia were plunged into misery and suffering. Under the heavy pressure, internal strife broke out within the borders of the Great Xia. 3 cities raised their flags and rebelled. The flames of war rose within the borders of the Great Xia. Internal and external troubles broke out at the same time. The 1,000-year-old dynasty was nearing its end. In front of the northern Meng army, Fan Lingyue looked at the sky above the imperial city of the Great Xia. The once majestic and unshakable purple fate was rapidly falling apart. No matter how strong the dynasty was, it could not escape the river of time. The war horses neighed as the pass was unstoppable. Not only did northern Meng's cavalry have the numbers and combat strength, they were invincible. 100,000 iron cavalry, in addition to 200,000 elite soldiers, all under the control of Fan Lingyue, slowly nibbling away at the northern territory of Great Xia. In Clear River City, the Marquis of Peace had also been ordered to head north 3 days ago with the remaining 150,000 soldiers of Clear River City. Now, there were less than 10,000 guards left in Clear River City. The situation in the north of the Great Xia was too critical. The fall of Yangue city was a heavy blow to the Great Xia. In less than a day and a night, 170,000 soldiers and millions of civilians were all slaughtered, causing the entire Great Xia to sink into a heavy depression and sorrow. In the Clear River Marquis estate, Ning Chen remained unconscious on the bed. Zhang Sun had fed him the remaining 3 celestial reversal pills in the estate, relying on the violent medicinal effects to keep him alive, who was already on the brink of death. Zhang Sun's domineering nature was always unintentionally displayed to the fullest. If she didn't let him die, he wouldn't die even if it was worse than death. Ever since the fall of Yangue city, Zhang Sun had no intention of returning to the imperial palace. The current Emperor Xia had already lost his mind. He actually watched 170,000 soldiers and millions of lives die under the butcher knife of the northern Meng imperial court. Every day, Qing Ning would transfuse her blood into Ning Chen's body. For this reason, the shopkeeper of Duan Pharmacy was also brought over by Zhang Sun. The 2 of them had seen Ning Chen use this method before. Although they didn't know if it would work, they still had to try. Qing Ning was the only one who transfused her blood. Zhang Sun didn't dare to let anyone else try. She remembered Ning Chen saying that the more people transfused their blood, the greater the danger. Ning Chen's body was already in a mess from the violent medicinal effects of the 3 celestial reversal pills. Regeneration and destruction were constantly changing. One moment, the regeneration was stimulated by the medicinal effects, and the next moment, an even more violent medicinal effect would destroy it. Looking at Ning Chen's miserable state, Zhang Sun felt uncomfortable and guilty at the same time. When the Great Xia Emperor summoned Prince Yan back to the palace, she already felt that something was wrong. Although the rumors in the palace and the letters from the 4 Confucian officials made the Great Xia Emperor suspicious, it wasn't to the extent of making things difficult for Prince Yan. As such, the goal of the person who spread the news was too suspicious. Since it wasn't to deal with Prince Yan, then the real goal of letting Prince Yan leave was very likely to be Ning Chen. She sent someone to inform Prince Yan of her suspicions. Prince Yan, who was under house arrest in the palace by the Great Xia Emperor, immediately rushed out of the palace after receiving the warning. Unexpectedly, he was still one step too late. Neither she nor Prince Yan thought that the person behind this was the military advisor of the northern Meng imperial court. They also didn't think that Fan Lingyue would think so highly of Ning Chen that he would directly send the first disciple of the Northern Meng in 8th stage, Si Mingjian. There was no need to use a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. Everyone knew this, but the military advisor of the Northern Meng didn't think so. He wanted Ning Chen dead without a doubt. In the Imperial Edict Palace of Great Xia, the Great Xia Emperor sat on the dragon throne and looked at the battle reports in his hands. His expression was gloomy, and he didn't say a word. "Your Majesty, the city lord of Jiangyu City has been acting strangely recently. He seems to have intentions of rebelling." A black figure appeared in the palace and knelt down respectfully. "Good, very good." The gloominess in the Great Xia Emperor's eyes seemed to be able to condense water. He said the word "good" 3 times in a row. He really had raised many loyal officials in the 4th city. "Continue to investigate for me. See which other cities are rebelling," the Great Xia Emperor said in a low voice. "Yes," the Shadow Guard replied respectfully and left immediately. After the Shadow Guard left, the Great Xia Emperor slowly closed his eyes and said softly, "Pei Liang, has there been any movement in the West Palace?" Hearing the Great Xia Emperor's question, a haggard old eunuch walked out and said hoarsely, "There has been no movement." The Great Xia Emperor nodded and continued to ask, "How is the Empress?" "Your Majesty, since the Empress returned to the Marquis residence in Clear River City, she hasn't come out. It seems that she doesn't plan to return to the palace for the time being." Old eunuch Pei answered truthfully. The Great Xia Emperor sighed softly, "She is blaming me." After saying this, the Great Xia Emperor opened his eyes and looked at the old eunuch beside him who had followed him for more than 40 years. He said in a low voice, "Pei Liang, do you think what I did was right or wrong?" Old eunuch Pei was very old. His face was full of wrinkles and he was thin and haggard. However, when he heard the Great Xia Emperor's words, his expression was as expressionless as usual. He replied, "Your Majesty is the Great Xia Emperor. What the Great Xia Emperor does is always right." "Ha!" The Great Xia Emperor laughed, his eyes filled with madness. He said domineeringly, "That's right. I am the Great Xia Emperor. I will never be wrong. I want to see how these little rats are going to swallow me, a true dragon." Old eunuch Pei didn't say anything. He took a few steps back and silently returned to the darkness. In the cold heavenly mandate palace, Xia Rui's crazy laughter still echoed faintly. Xia Rui, the former great prince of the Great Xia dynasty, was the current Great Xia Emperor. After tearing off his cowardly and cautious exterior, it was as if he had become a completely different person. He was so terrifying and so crazy. The letter that he received that day was still on the table in front of Xia Rui. Who would have thought that this simple letter carried the lives of 170,000 soldiers and millions of civilians in Yangue city of the Great Xia dynasty? Xia Rui did nothing. He allowed the city to fall and the people to die. He was waiting for an opportunity. "Men, prepare the carriage and leave the palace." "Yes." Half a day later, the Great Xia Emperor left the palace. He took 3,000 imperial guards and went to Mount Chihua to pray for the soldiers who had died in the battle. The news of the Great Xia Emperor leaving the palace spread faster than pigeons. In this world, there were secret techniques that ordinary people couldn't imagine. They could travel 1,000 miles in a single day. The Great Xia Emperor leaving the palace was a big deal. Mount Chihua was located in the west of the Great Xia dynasty, about 300 miles away from the imperial city. If they hurried, they could reach it in less than 3 days. 3,000 miles of imperial guards were on standby. They escorted the Great Xia Emperor all the way to the west. They finally reached Mount Chihua on the 3rd day. The Great Xia Emperor ascended the heaven-reaching platform, accompanied by old eunuch Pei and 5 shadow dragon guards. Below him, 3,000 imperial guards blocked off all the paths. However, the most unexpected thing happened. A half-step to innate realm and 8 level 9 peerless experts climbed up from the cliff of Mount Chihua and appeared suddenly. Everyone present did not have time to react. Half a day later, the news of the great Xia emperor being assassinated and falling off the cliff with serious injuries spread. The world was shocked. At first, people were still suspicious. However, after the three dukes came out to supervise the court, all their suspicions disappeared. Everyone knew that the three dukes of the great Xia dynasty were not allowed to interfere in the court unless it was absolutely necessary. This was the rule of the great Xia dynasty for thousands of years. Except for the half-step to the Xiantian realm, none of the 9 assassins survived. However, after the half-step to the Xiantian realm returned to Jiangyu City and confirmed the news of the great Xia emperor falling off the cliff, he died. Since then, the great Xia emperor falling off the cliff became an undeniable fact. The great Xia dynasty was in chaos. This time, even the three dukes could not suppress it. After Jiangyu City, 3 more cities rebelled. Now, the chaos of the 7 cities officially began. The powerful great Xia dynasty finally showed signs of weakness under such internal and external troubles. The collapse of the great Xia dynasty after thousands of years seemed unstoppable. No one thought that there would be so many hidden dangers in the great Xia dynasty. The great Xia dynasty had been invincible for thousands of years. No one thought that there would be any possibility of this huge dynasty collapsing, let alone something as stupid as a rebellion. In the end, the people of the great Xia dynasty underestimated the terrifying temptation of power. The great Xia dynasty was about to fall. The ambitious people in the dark could not wait any longer. This day, in Qinghe city of the great Xia dynasty, Ningchen woke up. His hair was gray and he lay on the bed. His fingers moved slightly. At the same time, a man, who was far away in the barbarian dynasty, seemed to have sensed it. Her fingers moved as well. The caltrip flower that was planted with the essence of blood in their hearts connected their hearts. Even if they were thousands of miles apart, they could not block this connection. Similarly, the barbarian king and Zhang Xuan's tired faces were filled with joy. The recent days of sleepless nights finally paid off. However, there was a slight difference. The barbarian king was happy and distressed at the same time. Zhang Sun was happy but angry at the same time. She had protected him time and time again, even going against the will of the great Xia emperor. However, he did not know how to cherish himself. Chapter 73. When Ningchen woke up, the first thing he saw was Zhang Xuan's happy yet angry eyes, as well as Qing Ning's calm expression. But Ningchen only woke up for an instant before fainting once more. Zhang Sun and Qing Ning were both startled. They immediately called for the shopkeeper to examine him. The final result was neither good nor bad. Ning Chen's body was still a mess, but since he had woken up once, it was very likely that he would wake up a second time. To Zhang Sun and Qing Ning, no more bad news was the best news. As long as he didn't die, nothing else mattered. 5 days later, Ning Chen woke up once more. This time, he didn't immediately faint again. When he saw Zhang Sun, he wanted to smile, but he was powerless to do so. Be honest. No one wants to see you smile. Zhang Sun grumpily scolded him. She was the clearest about Ning Chen's smile. It looked harmless, but it was filled with evil tricks. In truth, Ning Chen really did want to smile. Before he had fainted, he had clearly seen the caltrip crystal flower bloom. It was very beautiful, just as beautiful as Wild. Wild wouldn't die, and he wouldn't die either. There was nothing better than this. When a person was happy, it was easy for them to become excited. Ning Chen fainted once more. This time, Zhang Sun was in no rush. She calmly had Qing Ning bring the shopkeeper over. She didn't even wait for the result before returning to rest. She hadn't rested for several days because she was worried about this little fellow. In the princess courtyard of the barbarian dynasty, Wild was weakly sitting on a bed with a pale face. In front of her was the barbarian king's face. "I want to go find him," said Wild. "No." The barbarian king shook his head, refusing without hesitation. That fellow had already harmed his precious daughter. How could he allow Wild to go find him? I want to go find him, insisted Wild. No. Seeing that Wild refused to give up, the barbarian king's fury soared. You're only thinking about that stinking brat. Do you even have me in your heart? Yes. A man nodded and replied very seriously and honestly. The barbarian king choked. In the end, he couldn't bear to lose his temper. He could only patiently and tactfully advise, Wild, that brat is too weak right now. He can't protect you. Once he has enough strength, you can go find him. How long do I have to wait? Asked Wild softly. Wait until he reaches the peak of the 9th rank, the barbarian king said casually. A man thought for a moment and frowned. She had forgotten to ask Ning Chen what rank he was. However, since he was so good at fighting, he should not be far from rank 9, right? Thinking of this, a man nodded seriously. Okay. Barbarian King looked serious on the surface, but he was laughing proudly in his heart. He had just received the latest news. Although Ning Chen had woken up once, he was almost crippled. He could go to hell if he wanted to cultivate to the peak of the 9th level. Although it wasn't appropriate to lie to a man like this, in order to prevent her daughter from being hurt, her mother's spirit in heaven would definitely support him. In Marquis Clear River's estate, Ning Chen had also received the news from Zhang Sun that a man had woken up. The smile on his face never disappeared, and he looked like a love-struck fool. Qing Ning couldn't stand it any longer and slapped him hard on the head. Ning Chen grimaced in pain, but he didn't dare to resist. He could only raise his head and smile brightly. However, after Ning Chen woke up, the gratification on Zhang Xuan's face only appeared for a short moment before he was distracted by the dangerous situation in the Grand Xia. Ning Chen listened to Qing Ning talk about the recent situation in the Grand Xia, and his heart sank. He didn't expect that so many things had happened while he was unconscious. The matter of the Beiwu Marquis was far beyond his expectations. The Grand Xia Emperor actually didn't do anything, and watched as Yangue City was slaughtered into a ghost town. Then why did he pay the price to return to the imperial city to deliver the letter? As for the coldness and power displayed by the military advisor of the Northern Meng Imperial Court, Fan Lingyue, Ning Chen wasn't too surprised. This was a ruthless woman that even a nobody like him wanted to get rid of. One could only imagine how scheming and ruthless she was. Sister Qing Ning, push me to see Her Highness, said Ning Chen softly as he looked at Qing Ning. Hearing this, Qing Ning frowned. She didn't understand what this brat wanted to do. There's an important matter, said Ning Chen seriously. Qing Ning nodded and didn't ask any more questions. She helped him onto the wheelchair and pushed him towards Zhang Xuan's room. When the two entered, Zhang Sun was writing a letter to Prince Yan. She knew that the two had an agreement. Ning Chen was to be her sword attendant for a year. Now that the time was not up, the agreement should still be fulfilled. The most important thing for a man was a promise. There was no reason to shirk it. As long as he didn't die, he had to fulfill it. Her Highness, said Ning Chen respectfully. I will summon Prince Yan. You still have to go with him. After the year is up, I will send Qing Ning to pick you up. As Zhang Sun spoke, she folded the letter and put it into faith, then handed it to Qing Ning. Her Highness, Ning Chen reached out to stop Qing Ning from leaving. He looked at Zhang Sun seriously and said, I can't go with Prince Yan, and he can't come either. Hearing this, Zhang Sun frowned. She didn't like hearing these words, especially coming from Ning Chen's mouth. Give me an explanation, said Zhang Sun in a low voice, suppressing her patience. Ning Chen bowed respectfully again and said, Her Highness, have you ever thought about where the 7 cities rebellion originated from? In this world, there was no one who would seek death for no reason, unless there was a great temptation waiting for them. The 7 city lords were already lords of their own cities. They could be said to be great officials of the border. Their real power was only second to the 10 marquises of the Great Xia. Why would they rebel? Their goal was very clear. They wanted to become the protectors of the dragon and re-establish the dynasty. And in the Great Xia, there were only 3 people who had the qualifications, ambition, and not much hope of inheriting the throne: the 3rd prince, the 10th prince, and Prince Yu. Zhang Sun was clever. Hearing Ning Chen's reminder, she knew what he meant. She couldn't help but frown and say, "You suspect Prince Yu?" "I'm not sure yet, but Prince Yu is indeed a suspect." After saying this, Ning Chen told her about how Prince Yu had tried to recruit him. He really wasn't sure if it was Prince Yu, but without a doubt, Prince Yu was a great suspect. There was such a thing. Hearing Ning Chen's explanation, Zhang Xuan's frown deepened. Prince Yu had been exiled far away to Nanjiang by the Great Xia Emperor, and even a Marquis was sent to suppress him. Ning Chen was right. Whether or not Prince Yu was the mastermind behind the 7 Cities rebellion, she had to be careful. Prince Yen was indeed the best candidate. There was no need to act rashly and alert the enemy. His strength alone was enough to deal with everything. Xian Tian was an undefeatable monster in this world, and Prince Yen was one of them. Even more commendable was that although Prince Yen seemed uncompetitive, he was actually a very perceptive person. If Prince Yu really did anything, the sword in the hands of the current legend of the Great Xia would not show any mercy. "Qing Ning, destroy the letter," Zhang Sun sighed softly and said. "Okay." Qing Ning nodded. Her delicate hand clenched, and the letter inside immediately turned to dust. "Your Highness, I'll say something that I shouldn't say. Now that the Great Xia Emperor's fate is unknown, if we consider the situation of the Great Xia, letting the Great Prince ascend the throne as soon as possible is the best choice." When he said this, Ning Chen did not have any resentment or personal feelings. The Great Xia indeed needed to stabilize the hearts of the court and the people, and the rule of the Great Xia was to choose the eldest son. No matter how one looked at it, the Great Prince's ascension to the throne was justified and there would not be any disputes. In the short term, the Great Prince's ascension to the throne could cause the 3rd prince and the 10th prince to be dissatisfied and even rebel. However, once the Great Prince ascended the throne, any rebellion would become an illegitimate rebellion, and the 2 princes would have to seriously consider it. The strength of each prince of the Great Xia was far from enough to change the dynasty. The only result of rebellion was death. Thus, only he knew the method to make gunpowder. Ning Chen thought for a moment and said, "Looking at the current situation, the Northern Meng royal court is undoubtedly the Great Xia's biggest enemy, followed by the Eternal Night cult and the chaos of the 7 cities. However, it's better to pick on the weak. The Northern Meng royal court and the Eternal Night cult won't be able to fight back in a day or 2. Therefore, resolving the chaos of the 7 cities is the most urgent and most important matter. Is there any solution?" Zhang Sun asked again. The best way was to secretly get rid of the 3rd prince, the 10th prince, and Prince Yu. Of course, Ning Chen only dared to think about this in his heart. Divide them, then destroy them one by one. Ning Chen continued, since the 7 cities didn't rebel at the same time, and 3 of them only rebelled after the Great Xia Emperor disappeared, it means that the 7 cities aren't united. The person behind them only has the ability to influence the 7 cities, but doesn't have the power to command them. If you want to be a guardian of the dragon, you have to be alive. You have to control 2 princes and 1 prince, then use threats and promises on the 3 cities with the weakest wills. You can even give them the position of Marquis, a death exemption medallion, a red letter, or anything else. As long as one city succeeds, you can leave the backstabbing to it. Stabbing a knife once is enough. No matter who it is, they hate traitors the most and fear traitors the most. If one city rebelled, it would definitely attract the attention of the other 6 cities and cause them to be suspicious of each other. What's left is to create rumors. The Northern Meng's military advisor is very good at this, and he almost killed me. Of course, when the city that rebelled is besieged, the Great Xia must go and save it. It must be done with great fanfare, and the whole world will know about it. This way, it will be difficult for the other 6 cities not to waver. That's all I can think of for now. I'll add more when I think of it in the future. Ning Chen's mouth was a little dry from talking. He wanted to ask for a cup of tea, but he found that Zhang Sun and Qing Ning's expressions were not right. They were looking at him like he was a monster. What's wrong? Did I say something wrong again? Ning Chen thought back. He did not say anything disgraceful. Who did you learn all these schemes from? Zhang Sun came back to her senses and asked in a strange tone. Ning Chen laughed awkwardly. He was too lazy to make up another lie. From an old Taoist. Qing Ning, write these words to Duke Jingwu word for word. Zhang Sun ignored his lie. She glanced at Qing Ning and made a prompt decision. Although Ning Chen's words were a little sinister and straightforward, they were crude but not crude. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Duke Jingwu was not a pedantic and ignorant person. Chapter 75. The assassination 3 days ago had a great impact on the morale of the soldiers. Luckily, after Zhang Xuan's arrival, the negative atmosphere gradually dissipated. Zhang Sun was different from other empresses. She was the daughter of a marquis and was not afraid of the battlefield. After a short rest, she immediately summoned the remaining general. There were originally 3 generals in the army. Now that 2 of them were assassinated, there was only 1 left. He was already old and his role in the army was to stabilize the morale of the soldiers. Empress. After the old general came, he immediately knelt down with tears in his eyes. He was full of guilt. Old General Ling, please rise. Zhang Sun quickly went forward to help the old general up. The latter had been with the Zhang Sun family for more than 30 years and was loyal to them. Although she was the empress, she could not accept this. He is the father of the General Ling you know in the palace, Qing Ning reminded. Ning Chen was shocked and then understood. No wonder General Ling took care of him in the palace. After letting him go, Zhang Sun did not punish him and even promoted him. Actually, General Ling was a good person. Ning Chen had not seen him for a long time and missed him very much. After Zhang Sun helped the old general up, she was about to introduce Ning Chen to him. However, when she saw Ning Chen spacing out again, she was furious and slapped his head. Greet old General Ling. Ning Chen came back to his senses after being slapped by Zhang Sun. He immediately bowed respectfully and said, "Greetings, old General Ling." This is... The old general was confused and asked. Ning Chen, you should be familiar with him, Zhang Sun introduced. Oh? The young man who bombed Jingqi Palace. As expected, heroes come from the young. When the old general answered, he was a bit surprised. Looking at the empress' behavior just now, she did not treat the young man as a servant at all. That was something an elder would do to a nephew. Ning Chen was a bit embarrassed and smiled shyly. Why did she remember these things? He had a lot of positive images, such as bravely jumping into the frying pan, okay, he admitted that he only thought of this. Zhang Sun and Qing Ning did not like Ning Chen to smile. When they saw this smile, they felt uncomfortable all over. Therefore, Qing Ning went up and gently patted the latter's shoulder. Then, Ning Chen began to secretly grimace. After chatting for a while, Zhang Sun looked worried and asked, "Old General, what's the situation now?" "Reporting to Your Highness, Northern Meng's army of 300,000 has set up camp 200 li away. It's possible that they could attack at any time," the old general said in a heavy tone. 200 miles. When Ning Chen heard this, he was shocked. He couldn't care less about the rules and asked anxiously, "When did this happen?" "This is the news sent by a spy at noon. Just now, another spy confirmed this information." The old general replied. There was a trace of doubt in his words. Was there something wrong? What's wrong? Zhang Sun knew Ning Chen's personality. There had to be a reason for him to lose his composure. Someone might attack the camp tonight. Ning Chen said in a low voice. Impossible, the old general immediately denied. Even the fastest horse would take more than 2 hours to cover a distance of 200 miles. Before that, our spies would be able to send back the news. What if the spy doesn't know? Ning Chen asked. How is that possible? 300,000 is such an obvious target. Idiot. At this point, the old general was suddenly startled. His expression changed, and his entire body began to tremble. 300,000 was extremely obvious. It could even be said that it was impossible not to notice. However, on the other hand, if a few thousand soldiers were missing, no one would know. As long as the army was used as bait, these few thousand soldiers could avoid the spy's line of sight and be done without anyone noticing. This was a very simple logic. However, with Wu Hou injured and 2 generals dead, he was the only one left. It was already difficult for him to stabilize the morale of the army, so he didn't think about this aspect. Just a little bit more, and he would have become the sinner of Grand Xia. I'll send the order now. The entire army is to be on guard against a night attack, the old general said in a low voice. Wait. Ning Chen frowned and stopped the old general from leaving the camp. Little brother, what do you think? The old general stopped and asked politely. Just call him Ning Chen. He's just Hu Meng Meng. He doesn't have the qualifications for the old general to be so courteous, Zhang Sun interjected. Ning Chen rubbed his nose and said, what I want to say is that even if there really is a night attack, there won't be too many people. There's no need to make a big fuss and make the morale of the army nervous again. Hearing this, Zhang Sun nodded in agreement and said, he's right. Now that the morale of the army has finally stabilized, it's not good to be overly nervous. The old general nodded, indicating that he understood, then left the camp to make arrangements. Nyang Nyang, the old general is too old. He's not suitable to lead the army anymore. After the old general left, Ning Chen tactfully reminded her. He had already endured for a long time. This old general really wasn't cut out for leading troops. He could handle logistics, but if he went to war, he would only harm others and himself. How could Zhang Sun not understand the meaning in Ning Chen's words? She sighed softly and said, Old General Ling has been with the Zhang Sun family for over 30 years. Even if he doesn't have merit, he's still worked hard. Once this war is over, this consort will make arrangements for him to enjoy his remaining years. Hearing Zhang Suan's words, Ning Chen didn't continue talking about the old general. He asked, Nyang Nyang, is there a general in the Marquis army that's worth promoting? If there's no other choice, we can transfer one from somewhere else. We can't keep going on like this. There's not enough time. Also, changing generals at the last minute is a big taboo. This consort will take care of this for now. Once this war is over, we'll choose a new general, Zhang Sun said gravely. Can you do it? Ning Chen muttered softly. He was very doubtful. Slap. Qing Ning unrestrainedly slapped the former's head. This brat was becoming more and more impudent. When Nyang Nyang followed the Marquis to the east and west, you weren't even born yet, Qing Ning said unhappily. Ning Chen was hit until it hurt, but he didn't dare resist. His mouth was cheap, so he deserved to be hit. Qing Ning was a diehard fan of Zhang Suan's, so he didn't want to get hit again. Ning Chen, this consort knows that you have talent that normal people don't have, so this consort needs your help in this war. As she spoke, Zhang Sun actually stood up and took a step forward to bow with a solemn expression. Seeing this, Ning Chen was so frightened that he almost fell out of his wheelchair. He quickly turned his wheelchair and moved away from Zhang Sun, avoiding this bow. Nyang Nyang, in my hometown, being bowed to by an elder will shorten one's lifespan. You can't harm me. Ning Chen smiled bitterly. Wasn't this just scaring him? He didn't have much of a burden and couldn't endure this kind of torment. On the side, Qing Ning also jumped in fright and said, Nyang Nyang, why are you still being so polite with him? Zhang Suan's mood from the two's nervous actions also disappeared. She straightened her body and said calmly, in any case, this consort has already said what needed to be said and done what needed to be done. If this consort finds out in the future that you still haven't done your best, be careful of your head. That's more like it. Hearing this, Ning Chen and Qing Ning both inwardly sighed in relief. Zhang Xuan's actions just now had truly frightened them. Suddenly, Ning Chen realized that he was a bit cheap. He wasn't used to hearing nice words, so he had to be hit and kicked to feel better. The main reason was that Zhang Xuan's strength had left a shadow in his heart. If this happened, no one would be able to endure it. "Do you still have the jade pendant this consort gave you?" asked Zhang Sun. "Yes." Ning Chen took it out. He had always kept it close to his body, afraid that if he lost it, Zhang Sun would chop off his head. "Be careful." Zhang Sun nodded and didn't say anything else. This was her keepsake, and also the keepsake of Zhang Xuan's bloodline. It might be of great use at a critical moment. "Alright, you guys go back and rest. There's still a tough battle to fight tonight." Zhang Sun waved her hand and dismissed them. "Yes." Ning Chen and Qing Ning bowed respectfully, then left. "Sister Qing Ning, what happened to Her Highness just now? She scared me to death." After leaving the tent, Ning Chen still had lingering fears. Qing Ning sighed softly. Right now, Emperor Xia's fate is unknown, Great Xia is surrounded by enemies, and Marquis Taiping is seriously injured. The pressure on Her Highness right now is greater than anyone else's. She really wants to win this battle. After saying this, Qing Ning turned around and said with an incomparably solemn expression, "Ning Chen, you must help Her Highness win this battle." "I will do my best," promised Ning Chen seriously. The reason it was a promise and not a promise was because he knew how terrifying the military advisor of Northern Meng's imperial court 200 li away was. He didn't have the confidence to win against her, even if he was a transmigrator. Transmigrators weren't omnipotent, but that military advisor was almost omnipotent. It could be said that the current situation in Great Xia was basically caused by that woman called Fan Lingyue. Great Xia had been at peace for a very long time, and had been invincible for a very long time. That was until the appearance of this stunning woman, who forcibly raised the strength of Northern Meng's imperial court to a level where they could barely fight against Great Xia. It was very likely that the many hidden dangers in Great Xia had the shadow of this extraordinary woman. Otherwise, why would the Eternal Night cult make a move as soon as Northern Meng's imperial court sent out their troops? Even Great Xia's territory was in chaos. In his opinion, the best way was to get rid of this woman as soon as possible. Otherwise, this battle would be too difficult for Great Xia to win. It was said that the times created heroes, but this saying didn't really apply to Northern Meng's military advisor, because this woman was so powerful that she could single-handedly create an era. Against such a person, he really didn't have the slightest confidence to win. At night, the moonlight descended. Ning Chen wrapped himself in thick clothes and sat on a high ground in front of the camp. He quietly looked into the distance, and his mouth would cough from time to time. Qing Ning accompanied him by his side. Whenever she saw him cough, her heart would always ache slightly. She knew very well that Ning Chen's injuries were far from healed. Otherwise, why would a cultivator need to wrap himself in such thick clothes at night? Gradually, Ning Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. His cultivation had already fallen between grade 4 and grade 5. Moreover, it was extremely unstable, sometimes high and sometimes low. This was only because his foundation was far superior to others that he was barely able to maintain a little bit of his cultivation. The current him only had the ability to shoot an arrow. Therefore, this arrow must be shot accurately. Chapter 76. The sound of iron hooves clanging against the cold wind could be heard as the horses galloped in the dark night. One could vaguely see the cotton covers tied to the horses' hooves. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes even more. The military advisor of Northern Meng would not make any mistakes. How big was the impact of the cotton covers? In fact, it was not big. To put it simply, it was nothing more than hearing the galloping of horses from 5 kilometers away or 9 kilometers away. However, on the battlefield, a distance of 1 kilometer could result in a completely different outcome. The military advisor of Northern Meng did not make any mistakes in this detail. The general leading the troops was an expert. The closer he was, the harder it was to hide his aura. Ning Chen slowly drew his bow and nocked an arrow. He was about to shoot, but after a while, he pulled back his bow. Is the imperial concubine safe and sound? Ning Chen turned around and looked at the woman beside him as he asked softly. Qing Ning nodded. Zhang Xuan's tent was surrounded by experts from the army. As long as it was not an expert like the one who tried to assassinate Marquis Wu, the Empress' safety was guaranteed. Although Marquis Taiping was seriously injured in the assassination a few days ago, the three swordsmen were not much better off. They would not be able to attack again in a short period of time. Then I am relieved. Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and walked down from the high ground. He said, Sister Qing Ning, let's go greet the military advisor of Northern Meng. Since he only had the ability to shoot one arrow, why not give it to the woman of Northern Meng? Qing Ning was startled, but she did not stop him. With her around, nothing would happen to Ning Chen. After a while, a horse carriage set off from the camp and disappeared into the darkness. The distance of 100 kilometers was not far. If a horse galloped quickly, it would take 2 hours. The horse carriage was not as fast as a horse, but after 3 hours, it arrived in front of the Northern Meng camp. Ning Chen found a place with slightly higher ground, then looked in the direction of the Northern Meng camp and drew his bow again. In front of the Northern Meng camp, Fan Lingyue stood in the cold wind and quietly looked in the direction of the Great Xia camp. Her eyes were emotionless. The light blue clothes were simple but revealed nobility. Fan Lingyue's identity was not difficult to recognize. When Ning Chen saw the light blue clothes, he felt a sense of familiarity. When he looked at the former's face, his body could not help but tremble. It was her, the woman he had coincidentally met in Moonfall City, Moon Spirit. Fan Lingyu, Yuling fate really played tricks on people, full of lies. It was no wonder that the 8th prince of the Great Xia dynasty had died so easily. It turned out that she had appeared at that time for this matter. There was no reason to take back a bow that had been bent. In this cold wind, Ning Chen's eyes were terrifyingly cold. Just as Fan Lingyue had said, she and Ning Chen were very similar people. Beneath their calm exterior hid an extremely heartless heart. They appreciated each other and even chatted happily with each other. However, none of this could stop the two of them from killing each other. The arrow in the cold wind was like a shooting star. The silver light was so dazzling in the night sky. However, before he could react, the arrow was already in front of him. However, this stunning arrow was caught by a hand. The young general appeared in front of Fan Lingyue and blocked this merciless arrow with one hand. Sister Qing Ning, let's go, Ning Chen said softly. Yes, Qing Ning replied. The two of them got on the carriage and left quickly. Not long after, they disappeared into the darkness once again. In front of the Northern Meng camp, the young general looked at the direction where the arrow came from and couldn't help but frown. He didn't understand who wanted to assassinate the military advisor. He is Ning Chen. Fan Lingyue said indifferently. She turned and walked towards the tent. She didn't expect that the two of them would still meet. What a pity for those 3,000 light cavalry soldiers. Fan Lingyue knew that the attack on the camp had failed. She had said before that they were very similar. Not only were they heartless, they were also scheming. The old general in the Great Xia camp was a mediocre person, but Ning Chen wasn't. On the contrary, not only was he not mediocre, he was also an extremely intelligent person. In the dark night, a blurry shadow flashed past the speeding carriage. Ning Chen sat in the carriage, his face slightly pale. That arrow just now was too much of a burden for him at the moment. He was already mentally prepared for the fact that he didn't manage to kill Fan Lingyue. However, he still wanted to say something. Fuck genius. That young general was obviously not much older than him, but he was at least at the peak of the 9th grade. Since when were there so many geniuses in this world? He had worked so hard to train for so long, and there were always experts guiding him. He didn't even lack Xiantian experts. However, after training for so long, he returned to the 4th or 5th grade. That old woman, fate, was really fucking unfair. When the two of them returned to the camp, the battle had already ended. The 3,000 light cavalry soldiers were basically shot into a hornet's nest. Even if 100 or 200 of them escaped in the dark, it wouldn't change anything. Zhang Sun saw the two of them coming back in the carriage. She frowned and asked, "Where did you go?" Ning Chen got off the carriage and said honestly, "I went to greet the military advisor of the Northern Meng Imperial Court." Qing Ning nodded at the side, indicating that this was indeed the case. She thought that the two of them just went to the Northern Meng camp to take a look. Who would have thought that the two of them actually dared to assassinate that military advisor? This brat's body wasn't easy to stay awake, let alone attack. Couldn't he make her worry less? Treat this consort. If you can't, bring your head to see me. Zhang Sun snorted angrily and said, "Yes." The medical officer trembled as he replied. Immediately, he hurriedly went out to prepare herbs and hot water. 6 hours later, Ning Chen woke up once. Looking at Zhang Sun beside him, he only said a few words before fainting again. "Your Highness, no matter what, we must defend to the death. In addition, write a letter to the old Marquis and ask him to lead troops to intercept Northern Meng's provisions. We don't need too many people, 50,000 should be enough. Also, if Fan Lingyue really uses cavalry to attack, Your Highness, please give up the 30,000 cavalry in the camp. Great Xia can afford to fight, but we can also afford to waste them. It's worth exchanging 30,000 for 20,000. In addition, even if all of these 150,000 people die in battle, we can't retreat. A defeated army is like a landslide. She has 100,000 cavalry, we can't retreat." Even in the midst of his illness, Ning Chen's words were still calm and ruthless to the point that it was terrifying. With just one sentence, he directly gave up the lives of the 30,000 cavalry and even the soldiers in the camp. "Rest well. We'll talk about other things when you're better." Zhang Sun couldn't bear it. She didn't agree or reject, but instead comforted him softly. Ning Chen smiled weakly. Before he could answer, he fell into a coma again. Qing Ning felt a chill all over. This was the first time she saw such a ruthless side of Ning Chen. "Do you feel like he's become a different person?" Zhang Sun didn't turn around and guess Qing Ning's thoughts. "Yes, I'm not used to it," Qing Ning answered honestly. The weaker a person is, the less they know how to hide themselves. Ning Chen isn't an affectionate person to begin with. All the shyness and even harmlessness that he usually shows is just an act for others to see. The more you interact with him, the more you can feel the coldness that comes from his bones. After saying this, Zhang Sun sighed softly and continued, "In the entire army, as long as nothing happens to you and me, I'm afraid that even if everyone else dies, he'll at most sigh emotionally and then turn around and won't take it to heart. I feel more and more fortunate that I forcefully dragged him into Weiyang Palace when we first met in the palace. Otherwise, if this kind of person became Great Xia's enemy, there would be a second military advisor in the world." The more Qing Ning heard Zhang Sun's words, the more shocked she became. She never thought that Ning Chen, who didn't dare to breathe loudly in front of her and Her Highness, would actually be someone that Her Highness thought so highly of, and even feared. "Your Highness, Ning Chen won't harm Great Xia." Qing Ning couldn't help but say this. She could hear the fear in Her Highness's voice and couldn't help but defend herself. "Ha!" Zhang Sun laughed softly and said, "Don't worry, I don't have any other intentions." Although he's ruthless, he still cares about that little bit of emotion in his heart. "I never thought that he would betray Great Xia. Of course, that's on the premise that you and I are still alive." Chapter 77. Ning Chen's fever was very bad, and it didn't get better even when night fell. The doctor in the tent was very anxious. The Empress' words were still ringing in his ears, and his mind was completely focused on this young man. Zhang Sun listened to Ning Chen's suggestion and did their best to defend. Regardless of whether the Northern Meng imperial court's attack came or not, their side had already expressed their attitude of defending to the death. On Marquis Qinghe's side, the letter had already been sent out, and he would probably receive it soon. Xingqiao Pass was originally guarded by 50,000 soldiers, and with the addition of the 100,000 soldiers that Marquis Qinghe brought over, there were already more than 150,000 soldiers. Deploying 50,000 soldiers at any time wouldn't affect the situation in the short term. After Yangue city was broken, Fan Lingyue left less than 10,000 soldiers in the city to wait for the reinforcements to arrive without exhausting the military strength of the army. This was also the reason why Fan Lingyue chose to massacre the city. She wanted these 10,000 soldiers to truly form a fighting force of 10,000, and not be on tenterhooks all day long due to various sudden sneak attacks. Rations were something that war didn't lack. The Northern Meng imperial court's rations would definitely pass through Yangue city, and Marquis Qinghe's mission was to bring 50,000 soldiers to delay or even destroy the rations of the Northern Meng imperial court. The amount of rations needed for 300,000 soldiers was extremely terrifying, and it was impossible for the Northern Meng imperial court to gather them all at once. They could only transport them through Yangue city to the front lines. The reinforcements of the Northern Meng imperial court had already entered Yangue city. Currently, there were at least 60,000 soldiers guarding Yangue city. If they wanted to take back the city, they would need to expend at least 3 times the number of soldiers, and this was under the condition that the Northern Meng imperial court didn't send any reinforcements. Therefore, it was unrealistic to want to cut off the rations of the Northern Meng army once and for all. At the very least, the current Great Xia didn't have that many soldiers to spare. As long as Marquis Qinghe could cause trouble for the Northern Meng army's rations, it would be the greatest help to Zhang Sun and even the entire Great Xia. The current Great Xia needed time to catch a breather, and Duke Jingwu was in the imperial city to mobilize all the soldiers in the world. Ning Chen was a true genius. Although his cultivation talent was average, he was smart and could see the key to the Great Xia at a glance. Zhang Sun was a person who knew how to make good use of people. She would seriously consider Ning Chen's opinions. What the army lacked the most at the moment was talented generals. Ning Chen's reminder would make her feel much more relaxed. It was precisely because of this that she couldn't leave this brat's help for even a moment. Ning Chen's coma really made her very anxious and annoyed. At night, the cold wind blew again. Ning Chen still showed no signs of waking up. Zhang Sun paced back and forth outside the tent in frustration. His eldest brother was unconscious, and so was this fellow. Qing Ning didn't know anything about military affairs. She didn't even have anyone to discuss things with. "Your Highness, why don't you summon the first prince over?" Qing Ning suggested when she saw her eldest grandson's expression. The princes of Great Xia were all rare talents. Perhaps they could be of some help to Her Highness. "No, he's the crown prince. The future of the Great Xia depends on him. He can't be in any danger," Zhang Sun rejected without hesitation. Cough, cough. At this moment, a series of violent coughs resounded. The wheelchair turned, and Ning Chen walked out wrapped tightly. His face was terrifyingly pale. "Your Highness is right. The first prince can't come. It's not suitable for him to come either," Ning Chen said tiredly. The first prince was too righteous. He could be a Taiping sage, but it was not suitable for him to come to this battlefield full of schemes and plots. "When did you wake up?" Qing Ning asked with a joyful expression. However, before Ning Chen could reply, Zhang Suan's angry voice sounded. "Who let you come out? Go back and rest." "Your Highness, I'm fine. I've slept for a day and my head is a little dizzy. I came out to get some fresh air. I'll go back in a while." Ning Chen pleaded helplessly. Actually, he was a little worried about Zhang Sun and wanted to come out to take a look. The Great Xia dynasty had been established for more than 1,000 years. This was probably the first time that the current empress came out to oversee the army. One could imagine how much pressure Zhang Sun was under. The Great Xia dynasty was now surrounded by enemies. If they could delay the northern Meng imperial court's army for one more day, they would gain one more day for the Great Xia dynasty. Just as he had said earlier, he would do everything he could to help Zhang Sun get through this difficult time. Zhang Sun frowned but did not say anything more. This kid's temper was even more stubborn than a bull. It was useless to persuade him. Your Highness, I remember that there is a river 300 kilometers behind us. If we lose, send someone to destroy the bridge, Ning Chen said calmly as he looked at the northern Meng imperial court's army. Is there no hope? Zhang Sun sighed and asked. If it was someone else, there might be hope. But our opponent is Fan Lingyue. We will definitely lose, Ning Chen said honestly. He was speaking the truth. They were already at a disadvantage in terms of military strength. Moreover, Fan Lingyue had 100,000 cavalry while they only had 30,000. This was a fatal difference. They could not stop him. He would do everything in his power to delay this day as much as possible until Great Xia could catch its breath. Ultimately, the Great Xia dynasty was still the strongest. As long as they were not defeated in a single breath, the final victor would be the Great Xia dynasty. To be honest, after this battle, it would be clear whether the Great Xia dynasty would lose or not. They could lose, or even lose miserably, but they could not lose meaninglessly. Currently, their best choice was to fight a war of attrition. The longer they fought, the more desperate the battle would be, and the more disadvantageous it would be for the northern Meng imperial court. Your Highness, how is the situation in the east? Ning Chen thought for a moment and asked. The Eternal Night Cult and the northern Meng imperial court had sent out their troops at the same time, forcing the Great Xia dynasty into a sorry state. Unlike the northern Meng imperial court, who had a military advisor, the Eternal Night Cult relied on their tyrannical martial strength to open the path. An unparalleled martial monarch acted. From the martial Marquis to the generals of the Great Xia dynasty, no one could stop him. Monsters like Xiantian were truly troublesome existences. They have already broken through 2 cities. Fortunately, the Eternal Night Cult does not have many heavy cavalry, only 30,000. Otherwise, the Great Xia dynasty would have no need to fight this war, Zhang Sun said tiredly. It was rumored that there were no more than 10,000 heavy cavalry. Anything above 10,000 could not be lower. This was referring to the Eternal Night Cult's heavy cavalry. It would be an exaggeration to say that one of these terrifying soldiers could fight against 10. On the battlefield, they were practically invincible and undefeatable. Heavy cavalry had extremely high requirements for horses and soldiers. As a result, even the Eternal Night Cult, which had a deep foundation, was unable to train more of them. Unfortunately, although the Great Xia dynasty occupied the entire Central Plains, the rate of production of horses was too low, not to mention this type of heavy cavalry that had extremely high requirements for horses. Your Highness, is there no one in the Great Xia dynasty who can stop the Eternal Night Cult's heavy cavalry? Ning Chen asked, puzzled. The Great Xia dynasty had 1,000 years of foundation. If it were to be crippled by 30,000 heavy cavalry, it would be too unjustifiable. The Great Xia dynasty had been unparalleled for so long, they would definitely have some trump cards. There is. The military god, Marquis triumphant return, and the 100,000 Blackwater army under his command. Zhang Sun nodded with a grave expression. Then why has Marquis triumphant return not made a move? Ning Chen asked, even more puzzled. He had also heard of the military god, the head of the 10 marquises. Since he was so powerful, why didn't he make a move? Could it be that he really wanted to wait until the Great Xia dynasty was completely crippled before he was willing to make a move? Because before His Majesty disappeared, he strictly prohibited Marquis triumphant return from making any moves. As she spoke, Zhang Xuan's expression was also somewhat puzzled. She was becoming more and more unable to understand the Great Xia dynasty's intentions. Ning Chen was speechless. How the hell were they supposed to fight like this? They couldn't possibly have ordinary soldiers fight the Eternal Night Cult's heavy cavalry, right? And there was also that unparalleled martial monarch, who could stop him? Moreover, he had heard that the Eternal Night cult had a Xiantian who had never appeared. Just what was the Eternal Night cult planning? Ning Chen discovered that there were still many things he didn't understand, especially regarding the Eternal Night cult. His understanding was practically limited to the legends. He didn't know anything about the true internal situation of the cult. Northern Meng's barracks. Fan Lingyue was sitting in her tent. Her elegant face carried a trace of fatigue from many days of marching. After a long time, she softly asked, "When will they arrive?" Reporting to the military advisor, they have already set off at noon. They will arrive in 3 days at the latest, the young general respectfully replied. Tell Qing Wuyo to be careful. Don't let the spies of the Great Xia discover any clues, Fan Lingyue calmly reminded. Yes. The young general accepted the order, then immediately turned and left. Not being able to kill him back then has indeed attracted a lot of trouble. Fan Lingyue lightly sighed. She originally didn't plan to use them so quickly, but the Great Xia's determination to not appear at all forced her to use this trump card in advance. Allowing a tiger to return to the mountains would eventually lead to trouble. With Ning Chen, there were too many variables. Unfortunately, Si Ming Jian was heavily injured by that Prince Yan of the Great Xia and couldn't attack again in a short period of time. Otherwise, eliminating this hidden danger as soon as possible would be the best method. Thinking of this, Fan Lingyue's beautiful eyes slightly narrowed. If she guessed correctly, Ning Chen should have the same thoughts as her at this moment. She could give him a chance, but at the same time, she was also giving herself a chance. A moment later, Fan Lingyue picked up her brush and wrote a letter. Shortly after, she opened her mouth and said, "Men. Present." An armored guard walked in. Go to the Great Xia barracks and personally hand this letter to a young man named Ning Chen. After arriving at the Great Xia barracks, directly say that you want to see this person. The Great Xia's empress will naturally introduce you to him, Fan Lingyue said indifferently as she handed over the letter. Yes. The guard bowed and then also walked out. 2 hours later, the guard arrived at the Great Xia barracks and directly said that he was a messenger from the Northern Meng Imperial Court and wanted to see the Great Xia's empress. A general of the Great Xia came up and carefully searched his back, then immediately personally led him to Zhang Xuan's tent. Empress, a messenger from Northern Meng requests to see you. Come in. In the tent, Zhang Sun was still awake and spoke. Go in. The general pushed the guard and said in an unfriendly tone. Zhang Sun casually glanced at the Northern Meng guard in front of her and said indifferently, "Why did your military advisor ask you to come here?" The guard felt uncomfortable from Zhang Xuan's glance, but he still braced himself and said, "Under the orders of the military advisor, I am here to deliver this letter to a person named Ning Chen in your barracks." Hearing this, a cold glint flashed across Zhang Xuan's eyes. In an instant, the temperature of the entire tent seemed to drop. Chapter 78. Late at night, Ning Chen was invited to the commander's tent by Zhang Sun. Only then did he find out that Northern Meng's military advisor had sent a messenger to deliver a letter. After opening the letter, Ning Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. It seemed that Fan Lingyue was still impatient to get rid of him. Their thoughts were very similar. They both believed that getting rid of the other was the most direct and effective method. Go back and tell your military advisor that Ning Chen will keep the appointment, Ning Chen replied calmly, crushing the letter into pieces. The Northern Meng guard cupped his fists and bowed, then turned and left. Can't you see such an obvious trap? You can't go, Zhang Sun said angrily. Ning Chen shook his head. Nyang, this is our only chance, and also our only hope for victory. I have to try no matter what. No. Zhang Sun was unmoved and said angrily. Nyang, I've made up my mind. If you're really thinking about my safety, then let me think about how to keep tomorrow's appointment. Ning Chen's expression also darkened, not backing down at all. You! Zhang Sun trembled with anger. This brat was simply trying to anger her to death. At this time, Qing Ning also rushed over after hearing the news. Before she reached the tent, she heard the two arguing and quickly separated them temporarily. How can you talk to Nyang Nyang like that? Outside the tent, Qing Ning reprimanded in annoyance. There's no time to explain. Sister Qing Ning, come with me. After speaking, Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and walked towards his tent. After arriving at his tent, Ning Chen immediately took a brush and wrote down a list of names, saying, Sister Qing Ning, go alone. Be careful. Remember, you must return before dawn. Qing Ning took the paper. After a moment of surprise, she nodded lightly, then quickly left under the cover of the night. Only Ning Chen was left in the tent. He sat there with his eyes closed, pondering silently. He was thinking about what Fan Lingyue's trump card was. Fan Lingyue didn't know martial arts. This was something that everyone knew. Moreover, he had been in close contact with her before, and he indeed didn't feel any martial arts aura from her. In this world, unless one reached Xiantian, it was absolutely impossible for martial artists to completely conceal their aura. If that was the case, then what was her trump card? Fan Lingyue's calculations were very accurate. He knew that he would not refuse such a tempting meeting, and he indeed could not refuse, because this was his only chance to help Chang Sun win this battle. What exactly was it? Ning Chen tried his best to think about it, but he still had no clue. In this world, other than him, was there anyone else who possessed a weapon that could counter martial arts? There were only 6 hours left until daybreak. Ning Chen didn't move at all. He sat there, thinking hard. This meeting was too important. He didn't want to make any mistakes. At daybreak, Qing Ning finally came back. Ning Chen said a few words to her, then chased her out of the tent. Then, he went to work alone. Zhang Sun had come to visit several times, but Qing Ning shook her head and refused to let him in. At this time, she was the only one who could support him. Zhang Sun was so angry that his face turned pale, but he was still blocked by Qing Ning. Qing Ning's heart ached, but she was very stubborn. Actually, Ning Chen only said one sentence to her, if I die this time, I'll still be smiling. Your Highness's body is priceless. No matter how strong you are, you won't be able to bear it much longer. I will fight for this opportunity with all my might. I'll leave the rest to you guys. Half a day later, Ning Chen came out wrapped in thick clothes. Qing Ning went up and pushed him, heading north. Zhang Sun quickly went up to stop him, but was blocked by a jade pendant. Ning Chen took out the jade pendant and said softly, Your Highness, you said that you would agree to 2 of my requests back then. The first one has already been dropped. Now, I want to say the second one, which is to ask you to let me pass. After saying this, Ning Chen respectfully bowed one last time, then walked around Zhang Sun and continued walking. Zhang Sun stood there in a daze with the jade pendant in his hand. His heart throbbed with pain. That day, she had promised him that she would fulfill 2 of his requests. The first was that he wanted to leave the palace, and she had refused without hesitation. Now, he had brought up the second request, and she could no longer say anything to refuse. In the cold wind, Qing Ning pushed the person who wanted to go north all the way north. In the north, the young general accompanied the person who wanted to go south all the way south. Before sunset, the 4 of them finally met face to face. Sister Qing Ning, you can go back. Ning Chen glanced at Qing Ning and said softly. You can leave too. Fan Lingyue waved her hand and said calmly. Both of them looked worried, but they had no choice but to turn and leave, slowly disappearing into the night. After we parted in the imperial city of Grand Xia, I didn't expect that we would meet again under such circumstances. Fan Lingyue sighed softly and said. At that time, she had things she needed to do, so she didn't care too much about Ning Chen's identity. She didn't expect that she would let go of the person she wanted to get rid of the most. Ning Chen also sighed. Maybe this was the so-called will of the heavens. At that time, if one of them recognized the other's identity first, they wouldn't be here today. Should I call you Yuling or Fan Lingyue? Ning Chen's gaze was complicated. Who would have thought that the person who gave him the sword back then would become his enemy today? It's just a form of address. You hid your name, and I also hid mine. It's not like we're lying to each other. Fan Lingyue walked behind Ning Chen and quietly pushed the wheelchair under the moonlight. She was still so natural and not pretentious. In this world, perhaps only he and she were the most similar and the most familiar people. Unfortunately, they had become enemies. Do the ideals you spoke of back then still count? Ning Chen didn't turn back and asked softly. Fan Lingyue nodded and said, I didn't lie about this. The world is peaceful and the people are prosperous. Ning Chen mocked softly. Ha! Fan Lingyue laughed softly and said, it's never changed. Does your so-called world include Grand Xia? Does your so-called people include the citizens of Grand Xia? The sarcasm in Ning Chen's voice grew thicker. Of course. Fan Lingyue's reply left no room for doubt. Ning Chen laughed coldly and his tone became calm again. I thought my skin was thick enough. I didn't expect to meet my match here. Fan Lingyue wasn't angry at all. Her beautiful face was still as calm as before, perhaps even with a trace of a smile. She always liked to talk to people like her, even if they didn't agree with each other. She had seen too many stupid people in this world. Ning Chen's appearance made her feel fear, but at the same time, she was somewhat happy. Loneliness was always the scariest thing. Moreover, she had been lonely for a long time. Fan Lingyue, what are you thinking? The war started by Beimeng not only brought the flames of war to Grand Xia, it also brought disaster to Beimeng. How many of these 300,000 soldiers do you think will be able to return to Beimeng alive? Ning Chen asked in a low voice. I will do my best to bring them all back, Fan Lingyue said softly. Do you really think you can fight against the entire Grand Xia by yourself? Ning Chen laughed coldly. That's the truth, Fan Lingyue replied calmly. After saying that, the two of them fell into a short silence. After facing each other, although they were still standing together like before, they really didn't see eye to eye with each other. Fan Lingyue, what role did Grand Xia play in your so-called world peace? Ning Chen's eyes flashed with deep fatigue as he asked. Fan Lingyue laughed softly and said, Beimeng's world is too small. I need to bring them out, and Grand Xia is the biggest obstacle in front of me. That's all. How do you know that the people of Beimeng despise their world for being small? Maybe this is just your own wishful thinking. Ning Chen couldn't suppress his emotions again and mocked. In front of this woman, he didn't need to hide himself, nor was there a need to. Fan Lingyue didn't answer, but asked calmly, You're not a citizen of Beimeng. How do you know that they don't despise their world for being small? Humph. Twisting words and forcing logic, Ning Chen was angry, but he couldn't say anything. He was indeed not a citizen of Beimeng and didn't know much about it. He only knew that it was indeed a region with poor resources. Fan Lingyue's words might be right, but her methods were too intense. Fan Lingyue, the 170,000 soldiers of Great Xia in Yangue City and millions of civilians were killed just because of a single sentence from you. Don't you feel the slightest bit of guilt? No, there will always be people who have to be sacrificed on the road to peace. You, me, and them. You're a lunatic. Ning Chen mocked. He used to think that he understood this woman very well, but now he realized that he was wrong. This woman was a lunatic, and he didn't understand her at all. Fan Lingyue didn't refute and said indifferently, It's because there are too many normal people in this world that this world is so abnormal. Why can Grand Xia occupy the rich central plains, but Beimeng can only live in the cold north? The world belongs to the people of the world, and not Grand Xia. Ning Chen was speechless. The difference between countries existed in every dynasty and even in different worlds. World peace had always been an ideal, and no one and no era could truly achieve it. Fan Lingyue, if you continue like this, you will destroy Grand Xia and the Northern Meng royal court. In this world, it's impossible for true peace and fairness to appear. Not in the past, not in the future, Ning Chen sighed and advised. You haven't tried, how do you know it's impossible? Fan Lingyue sneered and continued, do you know what's the biggest difference between us? You don't want to try, because you hate failure. But I don't care about these things. So what if I fail? If I fail, I'll just give up my life to be buried with the people of the world. But no matter what, I've already tried. On the road to world peace, I, Fan Lingyue, don't want to regret it, and won't regret it. In the cold wind, Fan Lingyue stood upright, her beautiful face filled with determination and coldness. Her life was so short, and she didn't want to see the world still like this when she died. Ning Chen tidied his clothes and felt a little cold. The weather in the north really made him unhappy. It was already spring, but it was still so cold. Chapter 79. The two of them finally had nothing to say to each other. In the past, they were just acquaintances, but now, they had nothing to say to each other. It wasn't a simple difference in their standpoints, but the way they looked at things and did things was completely different. Fan Lingyue's methods were too intense, Ning Chen didn't like it. Ning Chen also thought too much before doing things, Fan Lingyue also felt that it was shameless. Ning Chen couldn't refute Fan Lingyue, he couldn't even prove whether her methods were right or wrong. There weren't so many right and wrong in this world, the biggest right and wrong had always been the human heart. If Fan Lingyue succeeded, 100 years later, she would be a good minister who created a prosperous world in the eyes of the world. If she failed, she would only be left with a bad reputation. Unfortunately, she didn't care about this. What she cared about was just as she said, the world was peaceful and the people were prosperous. Ning Chen never doubted the sincerity of Fan Lingyue's words. He mocked her only because he didn't like her methods. The two of them finally stopped. Ning Chen sighed, let's stop here. Okay. Fan Lingyue nodded. It was time to stop. Although they were similar people, they weren't on the same path. They couldn't continue walking forever. I'm very curious, how are you going to get rid of me here? A cold wind blew past. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. He still couldn't guess what her trump card was. There were only the two of them here. Although he was seriously injured, it was more than enough to deal with a weak girl who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. He never liked people walking behind him, but Fan Lingyue was an exception. Firstly, it was because the two of them really had a good chat before, and secondly, it was because Fan Lingyue didn't know martial arts. You'll know soon enough. Before she finished speaking, Fan Lingyue raised her palm and pressed it against Ning Chen's back. Her majestic true chi suddenly erupted, leaving no trace of life. This palm came without any warning, it was the most unimaginable result. At this moment, time seemed to slowly stop, unable to move forward. How could? Ning Chen didn't have time to say the words in his heart. He had calculated everything, but he didn't expect Fan Lingyue to know martial arts. He originally thought that he valued her a lot, but he didn't expect that in the end, he still underestimated her. He underestimated this girl who even deceived the world. Who said that the Northern Meng's military advisor didn't know martial arts? Looking at it now, it was the stupidest thing in the world. However, after a moment of surprise, Ning Chen still smiled. His smile was so bright that flowers bloomed on his face. Boom! At the next moment, an earth-shattering explosion rang out in the dark night like a sudden clap of thunder. The dazzling light could be seen from 100 li away. Ning Chen, military advisor. Several miles away, Qing Ning and the young general, who had been paying attention to the situation, were shocked. They stomped their feet and flew toward the center of the explosion. In front of the great Xia camp, Zhang Sun stood outside the tent. His pupils constricted as he gazed at the north, and an extremely ominous premonition arose in his heart. The night was enchanting. The bright moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling down a cold waterfall. Two figures, one from the south and one from the north, were rushing over at an extremely fast speed. They were like two shooting stars in the night sky, so fast that it was shocking. The cold wind was biting cold, but the two people who had fainted on the ground could no longer see this scene. There were only scars all around them, quietly telling the desolation of the night. Ning Chen didn't expect Fan Lingyue to have the Book of Chaos, which could conceal any aura. Fan Lingyue also didn't expect that gunpowder, other than being ignited by fire, would also explode under great pressure. He couldn't guess her trump card, so he transmigrated into a body full of gunpowder and a few flamethrowers. He originally planned to use them to save his life at a critical moment, but he didn't expect to be hit by Fan Lingyue's palm, saving him all the trouble. Qing Ning and the young general arrived at the same time. After a brief exchange of glances, their palms collided with each other. Soon after, they swept up the figures on the ground and left in a flash of light. Not long after, the northern Meng camp and the Great Xia camp fell into great chaos. The furious Zhang Sun and the young general almost overturned the entire tent. They poured panaceas and miraculous medicines into the mouths of the people on the bed, only hoping that they could save the lives of the people on the bed. However, the injuries of the two were too severe. The panaceas and miraculous medicines they usually used were now like dregs, not having the slightest effect. One day later, the news of the military advisor of the northern Meng being seriously injured and in a coma spread throughout the world, shocking everyone. No one expected the military advisor of the northern Meng to be injured at this time. This was a shocking matter. Once the northern Meng army lost this military advisor, the threat of the army would be reduced by at least half. The Great Xia could take a breather and even free up their hands to deal with the eternal night cult and the chaos of the 7 cities. The lords of the 7 cities were in a state of panic. This sudden change disrupted all their arrangements. With the military advisor of the northern Meng injured, no one could pin down most of the Great Xia's energy. Once this powerful dynasty that had been invincible for thousands of years took a breather, the lords of the 7 cities would probably deal with them first. In the residence of Prince Yu of the southern border, Prince Yu's face was ashen. He didn't expect such a thing to happen. Now, he couldn't hide anymore even if he wanted to. If the lords of the 7 cities were defeated, he couldn't escape the fate of being exposed either. He had the blood of the royal family. Now that the fate of Emperor Xia was unknown, he might still have a chance if he fought under this banner. Half a day later, a shocking battle broke out in Prince Yu's residence. Under the cover of 7 ninth-level masters and 2 half-step innate masters, Prince Yu finally escaped from Prince Yu's residence. However, none of the 7 ninth-level masters and 2 half-step innate masters survived. The green and red swords in the hands of Prince Yen were stained with blood. He mercilessly killed everyone who stood in his way. Since then, the masters that Prince Yu had recruited over the years were all wiped out. Not a single one was left. Soon, Prince Yu came to the light and became the ruler of the chaos of the 7 cities. He ordered the rebel army to attack the imperial city of the Great Xia. However, at this critical moment, Emperor Xia, who had been missing for many days, appeared. Emperor Xia returned to the Heavenly Mandate Palace. Without any explanation, he took back all the political and military power and immediately ordered Marquis triumphant return to send troops to suppress the rebellion of the 7 cities. With the appearance of the god of war, the situation changed. The might of the 100,000 Blackwater army once again shocked the world. The 250,000-strong rebel army of the 7 cities was as vulnerable as tofu. In 3 days, they were defeated again and again. Eunuch Pei, who was by Emperor Xia's side, made his move. He killed all the masters of the 7 cities like a whirlwind. Even the half-step innate masters were not spared. Only then did the world discover in horror that the eunuch by Emperor Xia's side was actually a master of the innate level. No one knew how this eunuch managed to hide from the world, but there was no doubt that this old man was truly a master of the innate level. In the end, the rebellion of the 7 cities, from the lords of the cities to the ordinary generals, was completely wiped out. Emperor Xia announced his return in such a cold and merciless way, completely shocking the world. Prince Yu's ears and nose were cut off by Emperor Xia for his crime of rebellion. He fell from the city wall and was hanged alive. His miserable screams lasted for 3 days, scaring the children into crying in the middle of the night. There was silence within the great Xia dynasty. There was not a single sound of dissent. All of the courtiers were terrified of Emperor Xia, who sat on the dragon throne of the heavenly mandate palace. Only now did the people of the world, and even the people of the Great Xia, realize that the Great Xia dynasty was in such a sorry state and couldn't withstand a single blow from Emperor Xia. His purpose was to draw out the hidden dangers within the Great Xia dynasty. Now that the hidden dangers were eliminated, Emperor Xia, who had been enduring for a long time, finally showed his ferocious fangs. On the second day after the rebellion ended, Marquis triumphant returned and the Blackwater army headed east in the direction of the heavy cavalry of the Divine Sect. On the northern battlefield, the 200,000 soldiers gathered by the 13 cities quickly rushed to the camp of Marquis Taiping to provide support. They wanted to completely annihilate the northern Meng army before the military advisor woke up. In the camp of Marquis Taiping, Zhang Sun, who had been dealt with one blow after another, looked extremely haggard. She held a letter in her hand, and tears streaked across her beautiful eyes. This was the letter that Ning Chen left in the tent. When he left, he was still worried about her, so he gave her a final warning. "Your Highness, if I don't come back, it means that I failed. Remember what I said to you. You must defend to the death. Fan Lingyue is unwilling to fight us head-on, so defending to the death is the best choice. In addition, Fan Lingyue is an extremely smart person. She will definitely have a backup plan. If something irreversible happens, Your Highness, remember to destroy that bridge. Horses are different from humans. They are still afraid of water. Even if Fan Lingyue finds a boat, it will be useless. In the end, Emperor Xia is very likely not dead. Your Highness, you only need to hold on until Emperor Xia comes out again. You are the Empress. No matter how ruthless Emperor Xia is, he can't just watch as something happens to you. He will definitely send troops to save you." Ning Chen presents his last words. The words in black and white were still vivid in her eyes. Zhang Sun finally couldn't hold back the tears in her eyes, and they fell down. Why did he always not listen to her? "Your Highness." Qing Ning stood at the side, holding back her sadness, and advised, "Your Highness, he is not dead yet. The letter has already reached Prince Yen. I believe Prince Yen will be here soon." Prince Yen was a Xiantian. At this time, she could only hope that as a Xiantian, Prince Yen would have a way to save his life. Although she knew that the chances were slim, although she knew that she was lying to herself, she still didn't want to believe that he would die like this. He was always so lucky, escaping calamity after calamity. This time would definitely be no exception. A day later, Prince Yen arrived. Without saying anything, he directly took Ning Chen away. Barbarian Dynasty, Princess Side Courtyard. A man sat on the bed, clutching her chest. Her small face was pale. She felt that something had happened to him, and it was a very, very big thing. She wanted to look for him, but she promised her father that she wouldn't look for him for the time being. He said that he had to keep his word. She couldn't disappoint him. She didn't want her father to worry, so she had been eating, drinking medicine, and sleeping obediently. However, she really couldn't pretend anymore. Northern Meng Army Camp. Fan Lingyue was still lying quietly on the bed, her face pale. Beside her, the young general was silent, guarding her day and night. At the last moment, Fan Lingyue circulated all her true qi in front of her to protect her. The Chaos Scroll also appeared to protect her, but her internal organs were still injured by the violent explosion, and she fell into a coma. The Northern Meng Army's morale was at its lowest. Without the military advisor, no one thought that they could continue. The 10,000 soldiers led by Qing Wuyo had already arrived a few days ago. They were stationed in the army camp, silently waiting for the military advisor to wake up. Chapter 80. In the west of Xia, the invincible martial monarch and the invincible martial Marquis finally met. The divine sect's armored cavalry against the Blackwater army, a true battle of generals against generals, soldiers against soldiers. Brilliance in Wu Ho's hand clashed with desolation in Wu Jun's hand. The battle between the saber and the halberd of the war god shook the heavens and earth, causing the sun and moon to lose their splendor. The invincible cavalry of the god sect finally stopped in front of the Blackwater army. Neither side gained an advantage. After a day of fierce fighting, they had to stop temporarily. The undefeated martial monarch was injured, and the world was once again shocked. The head of the 10 marquises of the Great Xia, Marquis Triumphant Xian, was actually an exceptional expert that did not belong to the 5 strongest experts in the world. For a time, the entire world was guessing what exactly was in the palace of the Great Xia dynasty that could hide from the eyes of the world. The phenomenon of breaking through to the Xiantian realm was earth-shattering. Unless one had some kind of precious treasure, it was impossible to cover up the pillar of light that soared into the sky. The martial monarch was injured but not defeated. Marquis Triumphant Return was unable to kill the martial monarch. In fact, there was no one in the world who could kill the martial monarch. The strength of a martial lord did not only lie in his incomparably powerful strength, but also in his almost immortal and indestructible physique. In this world, there were always some unreasonable people, and martial lords were one of them. It could be said that the Eternal Night cult would not be defeated as long as they could not kill the martial lord. This was a problem that the Great Xia had to overcome. But no matter what, the war in the west of Great Xia was temporarily stabilized because of the appearance of Marquis Kaixuan. For a short period of time, no one could do anything to the other. On the other side of the battlefield, the reinforcements from the north of Great Xia were much slower than the Blackwater army, which could travel 150 kilometers in a day. Ordinary soldiers could not compare to the Blackwater army, which was made up entirely of warriors. Within the northern Meng camp, panic had started to spread. The 200,000 reinforcements of Great Xia and the 150,000 soldiers of the Taiping camp had surpassed them in terms of numbers. The unconscious military advisor became the only hope in the hearts of the northern Meng army. As long as the military advisor woke up, he would definitely be able to lead them out of this crisis. However, to their disappointment, the military counselor had yet to wake up when the reinforcements from Great Xia arrived. The commander of the Great Xia reinforcements was a direct descendant of Emperor Xia, General Zhuoqiusheng. When he arrived, he took over all military power and read out Emperor Xia's decree, asking Zhang Sun to return to the palace. Zhang Sun received the order and took the unconscious Marquis Taiping away. Before leaving, he repeatedly reminded Zhuoqiusheng to focus on defense and attack as support. When the northern Meng army could not help but reveal the trump card left by Fan Lingyue, then he would make targeted arrangements. She believed in Ning Chen's judgment. Northern Meng's military advisor must have a hidden card. If they attacked rashly, they might suffer a great loss. Zhuoqiusheng responded respectfully. After Zhang Sun left, he snorted and returned to the camp. This was his best chance to be conferred the title of Marquis, so how could he not come out? He wanted to take advantage of the northern Meng military advisor's injury to completely crush the northern Meng army in one fell swoop. On the second day after Zhang Sun left, Zhuoqiusheng gave the order to break camp. 50,000 cavalrymen were the vanguard, 30,000 shield-armored soldiers and 20,000 archers took turns covering and following closely behind. The remaining 250,000 soldiers continued to follow, pressing towards the northern Meng imperial court like a tide. However, something that terrified the Great Xia soldiers happened. A group of heavily armored cavalrymen appeared from the northern Meng imperial court's camp. There were at least 10,000 of them. The flood of molten iron instantly crushed the 50,000 cavalrymen of Great Xia. Under the attack of the northern Meng heavy cavalry, the valiant shield-armored soldiers were immediately scattered. The 20,000 archers were completely useless and were swallowed by the flood in the blink of an eye. Subsequently, the 100,000 cavalrymen of the northern Meng imperial court suddenly moved, completely pushing the Great Xia soldiers into the abyss of death. Wherever the butcher's knife went, blood flowed like a river. When the northern Meng soldiers who were already in low spirits saw this, their morale was immediately boosted. They followed behind the 100,000 cavalrymen and crazily vented the anger in their hearts. The war lasted for an entire day and night, but it had already become a one-sided massacre. On the second day, the 35-man army of Great Xia was completely wiped out. Corpses were everywhere within a radius of 100 miles. Zhuo Qiusheng fled. He was scared out of his wits. In his fear, he forgot Zhang Xuan's instructions. If the army was defeated, he was to immediately destroy the bridge behind him. After the great victory, the 100,000 cavalrymen of northern Meng traveled 300 miles in a day and stepped over the most important Luyueqiao. From then on, they truly entered the hinterland of the Central Plains. When Zhang Sun, who was still on the road, heard the news, his face instantly turned pale. He leaned weakly against the carriage and couldn't say a word. Great Xia was in trouble. This was the thought in everyone's mind. No one had expected such a huge reversal of events. Originally, they thought that with the return of Emperor Xia and the deployment of the military god, Great Xia would be in an invincible position. However, they didn't expect such a shocking thing to happen in the northern battlefield, where there shouldn't have been any problems. The military advisor of northern Meng hadn't woken up yet, but the backup plan she had set up had once again dealt a heavy blow to Great Xia. The 10,000 cavalrymen of northern Meng were wearing the same heavy armor as the cavalrymen of the divine sect. They were invulnerable and even ordinary warriors would find it difficult to contend with them. Great Xia had lost miserably and sullenly. However, the most important thing was that Great Xia had lost the initiative. The northern Meng army had entered the hinterland of the Central Plains. The issue of provisions that they had been worrying about for a long time could be alleviated to a large extent. The Central Plains was rich and had no lack of provisions. After this battle, the northern Meng army that had entered the Central Plains could be said to be like birds flying in the sky. No one could predict their attack route anymore. The current Emperor Xia had endured for so long, but in the end, he still made a mistake in the use of people. Zhuo Qiusheng was a talented general, not a talented commander. He was good at commanding troops and fighting wars, but he was far from good at strategizing. His only mistake had become the key to deciding the outcome of the war. After Zhang Sun returned to the palace, she went straight to Weiyang Palace. She didn't even see Emperor Xia. She didn't want to see Emperor Xia and had nothing to say to him. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Emperor Xia was even older. His eyes were even more ruthless. He wasn't wrong. He was the Emperor of Great Xia. No matter what, he couldn't be wrong. Zhuo Qiusheng was executed by 1,000 cuts. His blood dyed more than half of the execution platform red. His shrill cries continued for an entire day. Emperor Xia was becoming more and more ruthless. He was even more ruthless than before. The entire court was silent. Everyone was in danger. They were afraid that they would be killed if they said something wrong. While the 3rd prince and the 10th prince were restraining themselves on the surface, they were moving more frequently in secret. They could see that Emperor Xia didn't have much time left. The northern Meng army had become a sharp sword hanging over Great Xia's head. Great Xia kept organizing troops to stop them, but they were evaded time and time again. Everyone could see that the generals of the northern Meng imperial court were trying their best to preserve their strength and wait for the military advisor to wake up. Great Xia's territory was too big. If the northern Meng army wanted to evade, no one could stop them in a short period of time. Emperor Xia gave 3 orders at once. He urgently summoned Marquis Bai, Marquis Xiang, and Marquis Ji back to the capital. Apart from the necessary defense forces, each of them led 100,000 troops back as reinforcements. This was the first time that 3 marquises had issued orders at once since the founding of Great Xia. It could be seen that Great Xia was truly anxious this time. The atmosphere in the northern Meng army also became tense. The 3 marquises of Great Xia had returned. In addition to the mobilized troops, they could gather at least 500,000 troops. This was extremely disadvantageous for them. However, they didn't dare to rashly attack the south. Every stronghold of Great Xia was impregnable. If they continued to attack, the 300,000 troops would be wiped out before the military advisor woke up. In this world, not everyone could scheme against the world with their own wisdom like the military advisor. In the east of Great Xia, in the number 1 shrine of Evernight, the martial lord was sitting high above. The 3 generals below him were kneeling respectfully. Every one of them was at least at the peak of the 9th rank. Some even showed signs of breaking through. After the divine sect's heavy cavalry took down 2 cities, they completely destroyed them. Wherever the flames of war passed, not even a blade of grass was left. The martial lord was injured and returned to the number 1 shrine to recuperate. The 3 generals followed him back. The 30,000 heavy cavalry also returned to the borders of Great Xia to await orders. The valiance of Marquis Kaixien and the Blackwater army was unexpected. This military god of Great Xia rarely showed himself. They only knew that he was a powerful figure, but they didn't expect him to be this powerful. The martial lord's injuries weren't serious and he recovered quickly. His special constitution had an unimaginable self-healing ability. The reason he returned to recuperate was to ensure that his body would be in perfect condition for the next battle. The Great Xia's Marquis Kaixien was a formidable opponent. He needed to treat him seriously. "Is that woman from Northern Meng still not awake?" the martial lord asked from above the main hall. Reporting to the martial lord, according to the news, Fan Lingyue is seriously injured. "There's no possibility of her waking up in a short period of time," a red-clothed general reported respectfully. The martial lord frowned. Without that woman, the Northern Meng army was no different from a toothless tiger. This was very bad news for the divine sect. Once Great Xia seized the opportunity to destroy the Northern Meng army, they would definitely gather all their forces to resist the divine sect's invasion. In a direct confrontation, the divine sect would definitely suffer heavy losses. "Take a divine heaven pill and send it to the Northern Meng camp. Have that woman wake up as soon as possible," the martial lord ordered. "Yes." The red-clothed general stood up and left. Military advisor of Northern Meng, don't disappoint me. After the red-clothed general left, the martial lord closed his eyes and softly muttered. The divine sect wasn't ready to start an all-out war with Great Xia. At this time, he didn't want anything to happen to Fan Lingyue. In the Northern Meng Imperial Court, a green light streaked across the sky. After appearing for a short while, it turned into a streak of light and flew away. Half a day later, in a desolate area of the Northern Meng Imperial Court, the green light appeared once more. With a wave of his hand, he threw the person in his hand into the lake. He had heard that the Northern Meng Imperial Court had a heavenly lake, so he came here. As for whether or not he could save this kid's life, he had to try first. Boom! At this moment, the winds and clouds in the sky suddenly changed. A terrifying intent quickly descended, as if angered by this intruder. "You, name." The rumbling voice seemed to come from beyond the 9 heavens. A powerful pressure stirred up the surrounding winds and caused the void to tremble. "Great Xia, Prince Yen." Prince Yen stood in the wild wind. His young face was indifferent. He was not moved at all. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor, Nyoibo Studio. His green clothes and black hair fluttered in the wind. This was the legend of Great Xia. Chapter 81. There was only one Khanate master in the Northern Meng Imperial Court, and that was the Imperial Preceptor. What was the most precious thing in the Northern Meng? The Imperial Preceptor and the Heavenly Lake. The Imperial Preceptor was just an idiot in the eyes of the Imperial Preceptor. But that idiot was really good at fighting and was one of the 5 strongest people in the world. There were 3 disasters and 5 tribulations in the Khanate realm. It was a punishment from the heavens and also a training for martial arts. The strongest person could go through the 3 disasters and the 5 tribulations. When they reached the peak, they could summon the dragon gate that had disappeared for a long time. Currently, the 5 most powerful people in the world had basically all gone through 5 tribulations and experienced 3 of them. Among the 5, the Dean of the Tiansang Academy, the Martial Lord of the Eternal Night Sect, the Abbot of the Du-Yi Temple and the Imperial Preceptor with the Golden Staff of the Northern Meng Imperial Court had already shown themselves. The only person who hadn't shown himself was also in the Eternal Night Sect. It was said that he was a peerless cultivator who could rival a martial lord. Those 5 were recognized as the strongest people in the world. They were also the earliest Khanate masters. Any one of them could easily beat up a new Khanate master. The 3 disasters and the 5 tribulations weren't on the same level. Although the legends of the Xia dynasty were geniuses, they hadn't cultivated for long and hadn't gone through the 5 tribulations yet. The Imperial Preceptor didn't care. Ning Chen needed to go to the Heavenly Lake to recover. Before that, he just needed to stop that idiot. The Imperial Preceptor landed beside the Heavenly Lake. The Imperial Preceptor went forward and grabbed the Profound Condensation Sword. He didn't pull it out but took back a part of his power. Boom! At that moment, a golden light suddenly struck down from the sky. It was like thunder from the 9 heavens. With a light king sound, the green sword flew out and blocked the sudden attack in the air. He had already said that this idiot had nothing but martial prowess, let alone any sense of shame. The green sword flew into the Imperial Preceptor's hand. The Imperial Preceptor slashed at the sky and a terrifying crack appeared in the sky. With a boom, it crashed towards the person who was hiding his head and tail. "You've angered me." A furious voice was transmitted from the sky. Immediately, a large hand came pressing down. The 5 fingers were like 5 mountains, while the palm was like a golden sky that covered a 10,000 feet radius. Facing the giant palm, Prince Yen was not scared at all. He clenched his right hand and the red sword flew out. Then, the cyan and red sword merged and pointed to the sky. A beam of cyan and red sword light shot into the sky and broke the giant palm. Clang! Immediately after, silver and yellow lights flickered and swallowed the spiritual chi in the Heavenly Lake. The 2 pages of the Heavenly Book appeared and floated above the cyclone in his dantian. Vaguely, the 2 pages of the Heavenly Book were broken into pieces and lost their light. When the Heavenly Book exploded, it automatically protected its owner and barely saved Ning Chen's life. The broken pages of the Heavenly Book kept absorbing spiritual chi. The 2 cyclones also spun violently and kept expanding. In Ning Chen's body, the 4 heaven reversal pills that he had taken earlier also exploded with medicinal power that was far from being used up. They destroyed and regenerated crazily. The Heavenly Book, the Heavenly Lake, and the heaven reversal pills worked together and finally unleashed their power. After the destruction, the power of regeneration took over and quickly repaired Ning Chen's almost destroyed body. Ugh! The painful groan was heard again. Ning Chen's body began to tremble. Every part of his body was regenerating. With the help of the 3 heavens, he returned to his original state. Gradually, the Heavenly Book quieted down and the Heavenly Lake calmed down. In the blink of an eye, the sky dispersed and Ning Chen slowly opened his eyes. When he first opened his eyes, there were no ripples, no spirit, and no emotions. After a moment, emotions poured into his eyes. His memories returned and he gradually understood everything. "Let's go." Prince Yen waved his 2 swords and made 2 moves at the same time. Immediately, he turned into a ray of light and left with the awakened Ning Chen. The Golden Staff State Preceptor blocked the 2 rays of sword light with an ashen face. He looked at the 2 people who disappeared, but it was too late to chase after them. In the northern Meng camp, the red-clothed warrior under the martial monarch sent a divine heaven pill to help Fan Lingyue wake up earlier. The young general sent the pill to the military advisor's tent. After a while, he walked out and thanked the red-clothed warrior and the martial monarch for their good intentions. The red-clothed warrior left without stopping. The battlefield in the east was still unstable and there was a possibility of another war breaking out at any time. He had to go back and wait for orders. Another 7 days later, the three martial monarchs of the Great Xia each led their army from afar. They didn't return to the imperial city but went directly north to intercept the northern Meng army. The three martial monarchs arrived almost at the same time. After several encirclements, they finally succeeded in blocking the path of the northern Meng army in front of Heaven's Gate. This was the most impregnable pass of the Great Xia. If the army wanted to go south, this was the only way. The three martial monarchs led the army north through Heaven's Gate and spent a lot of effort to force the northern Meng army into a dead end. 300,000 against 300,000, no one had the upper hand. Comparatively speaking, northern Meng had the advantage of 10,000 heavy cavalry and 100,000 iron cavalry. Their chances of victory were much higher. However, the Great Xia didn't seek victory. They only sought to delay. As long as they delayed the northern Meng army, the Great Xia army would arrive continuously until the northern Meng army was completely wiped out. The northern Meng army obviously didn't want to go head-to-head with the three martial monarchs of the Great Xia. They tried their best to stall for time while waiting for an opportunity to break out. However, the martial monarchs of the Great Xia weren't idiots like Shuocheng. Every one of them was good at war and strategizing. The three of them worked together and naturally wouldn't give the northern Meng army any chances. Step by step, they didn't rush and surrounded the northern Meng army in a triangular formation. The northern Meng army was in a desperate situation. Behind, left, and right, there were martial monarchs of the Great Xia guarding. In front of them was the impregnable pass of the Great Xia. The only choice was to force their way out. However, this would definitely result in heavy losses. At this critical moment, an unexpected order was given from the northern Meng commander's tent. They were to break through the pass immediately. The beautiful figure that walked out was still as beautiful as before. However, her face was even paler. The impregnable pass was over 100 feet long and was made of molten iron and gold wood. Without a mechanism, it was impossible to open it with human strength. Unless it was an innate expert who could use the power of heaven and earth. However, there were no innate experts in the northern Meng army. The strongest person was the young general. He was at the peak of grade 9 but still wasn't an innate expert. With the impregnable gate and the Great Xia soldiers guarding Heaven's Gate, the northern Meng army would have to lose at least 100,000 soldiers to have any hope of breaking through this impregnable pass. No one knew what the northern Meng military advisor was thinking. Similarly, no one knew when the northern Meng military advisor woke up. 10,000 heavy armored cavalrymen were in front and 100,000 northern Meng cavalrymen were behind them. Fan Lingyue stood in front of the formation and looked at the immortal pass in front of him. Begin. Yes. The young general respectfully accepted the order. Immediately, the aura around his body started to rise and soar. The next moment, a pillar of light suddenly shot up into the sky, shocking the entire world. The three martial monarchs of the Great Xia were also shocked. As if they had thought of something terrifying, they hurriedly ordered the army to stop at all costs. However, it was already too late. The young general who had reached the innate realm quickly passed the demonic tribulation of the 3 calamities and 5 tribulations. Immediately, he turned into a stream of light and rushed into the impregnable pass. He mercilessly killed all the guards and the 3 consecrated experts. The gate of Heaven's Gate, which had not been broken through for 1,000 years, slowly opened. Under Fan Lingyue's order, the Iron Hooves stepped into the impregnable pass and destroyed all resistance. After the northern Meng army entered, the gate of the impregnable pass closed with a bang. The 3 martial monarchs of the Great Xia, along with the 300,000 soldiers, were locked outside the pass and had no chance of entering. Find the mechanism diagram and kill everyone who knows about it. After entering the pass, Fan Lingyue coldly and mercilessly ordered. Yes. The young general accepted the order. Leave 50,000 people behind to guard the pass. You stay too. Fan Lingyue narrowed his eyes and continued to look at the territory of the Great Xia. Yes. The young general was startled. In the end, he still nodded respectfully. Chapter 82. The news of De Xia's gate being breached was like thunder. Behind this, the Northern Meng military advisor once again played a terrifying role. The Northern Meng army was previously forced into a corner by the three martial marquises of De Xia and retreated all the way to Heaven's Gate. Who would have thought that such a shocking change would occur at such a crucial moment? The young general beside the Northern Meng military advisor breaking through to the Xiantian stage was too coincidental. It was so coincidental that it sent chills down everyone's spine. It was impossible to suppress the Xiantian stage for a long time. When one was about to break through, it was extremely difficult to even suppress it for a day. So, was this really a coincidence? No one in the world would believe that such a terrifying coincidence could exist. Not only did the Northern Meng army, which was already in a desperate situation, manage to break through the encirclement, but they also completely blocked the three martial marquises of De Xia and their 300,000-strong army outside the gate. At this moment, even a fool would know that something was amiss, but they couldn't guess what the problem was. In the entire Northern Meng army, only one person knew the truth. Even the young general was kept in the dark most of the time. De Xia's Heaven's Gate was the #1 pass in the Central Plains. Its terrain was unique, making it easy to defend and difficult to attack. Fan Lingyue, who had long since woken up, had been waiting for an opportunity to take down this pass without shedding a drop of blood. The reason why she had been hiding was partly to show weakness to De Xia, and partly to wait for the Eternal Night Cult to make their move. The Eternal Night Cult and the Northern Meng Imperial Court were now in the same boat. Once the Northern Meng army was defeated, the Eternal Night Cult would have no choice but to bear the full fury of De Xia alone. Therefore, the Eternal Night Cult would definitely do anything to wake her up. In the Eternal Night Cult, there were many miraculous doctors and elixirs, but there was only one thing that could definitely wake her up. The Divine Heaven Pill. Just like the Xiantian Pill in De Xia's Imperial City, the Divine Heaven Pill was a panacea that only the Eternal Night Cult had. It was even more precious than the Xiantian Pill. The Eternal Night Cult had a long history, and its foundation was beyond imagination. Even so, the number of Divine Heaven Pills they had could be counted with one hand. At this moment, she needed a Divine Heaven Pill to help her break through the impenetrable defense of De Xia's gate. The Eternal Night Cult did not disappoint her. They sent someone to deliver a Divine Heaven Pill, but the one who consumed it was not her, but Yang Hong. Yang Hong had followed her for 7 years. He had the right to take the Divine Heaven Pill, and he had to take it. Yang Hong had been stuck at the pinnacle of the 9th level for a long time. Originally, he was already showing signs of a breakthrough. All he needed was an opportunity. Now that he had taken the Divine Heaven Pill, he naturally succeeded in stepping into the Khanate stage. The three martial marquises of Grand Xia came at the right time. In order to deal the greatest amount of damage to Grand Xia, she asked Yang Hong to forcefully suppress the arrival of the Xiantian phenomenon. Although it couldn't last for long, it was still possible to do so for 7 days. There were no accidents in the plan. The three martial marquises of De Xia were rejected outside Heaven's Gate, and De Xia's strength was immediately reduced by nearly half. Now, she only needed to completely destroy De Xia's resistance in the shortest amount of time, and the 1,000-year-old De Xia would not be far from destruction. The only unfortunate thing was that the internal strife in the Great Xia had been quelled by Emperor Xia while she was unconscious. Otherwise, the current situation would have been even more advantageous to her. Speaking of which, Ning Chen had already ruined many of her plans. Fortunately, he was dead. Without this variable, she would have a lot less trouble in the future. Northern Meng Royal Court, Flat Moon Plains. 2 figures walked one after the other, neither hurried nor slow. With the heavenly tomes, the heavenly lake, and the heaven reversal pill, do you still need this thing? Prince Yen walked to the front and asked indifferently. It's been a long time, and I've already gotten used to it. Furthermore, it would be a waste not to use this trump card. There's no need to rush it, Ning Chen replied indifferently from his wheelchair. Scheming is just a small trick. Prince Yen frowned and reminded him. Ha! Ning Chen laughed softly but didn't reply. He wasn't Prince Yen, and he wasn't strong enough to suppress everything. Scheming was still necessary. Senior, where are you going? Ning Chen asked a moment later. I don't know. I'm just walking around, Prince Yen said calmly. Why don't we take a trip to the Northern Meng royal court's capital? Ning Chen thought for a moment before suggesting. Sure, Prince Yen replied. After a simple discussion, the two of them changed directions and headed in the direction of the Northern Meng royal court's capital. The Northern Meng royal court's territory wasn't small. However, most of it was grasslands and deserts. In addition, the climate was cold and resources were scarce. This was why it was so poor. In the past 7 years, under Fan Lingyue's governance, the Northern Meng royal court's situation had gradually improved. However, it was still far inferior to the powerful and rich Great Xia. It was said that the Northern Meng royal court's capital was a city built in the desert. It had more than 1 million people, and it was the most prosperous and rich place in Northern Meng. On the way, Ning Chen was a little worried as he asked softly, Senior, will Imperial Preceptor Golden Staff spread the news that I'm alive? No, that idiot doesn't even know me. How can he know you? Furthermore, although he's shameless, he cares a lot about his face. He definitely won't mention such an embarrassing matter to anyone, said Prince Yen with certainty. That's good. Ning Chen nodded. He was prepared to give Fan Lingyue a surprise, so how could he expose it now? Senior, what realm are you at now? Ning Chen asked the question he wanted to know the most. The peak of the 4th tribulation of the 5th tribulation realm, said Prince Yen honestly. Hearing this, Ning Chen unconsciously smacked his lips. What a powerful realm. Senior was about to catch up to those 5 old monsters and become the 6th monster in the world. Compared to this senior, he realized that any so-called genius or heavenly pride was laughable, let alone a martial trash like him. He was handsome, talented, and also good at fighting. Walking together with such a senior really made him unhappy. He thought of Wild. In this world, only Wild would seriously and cutely say that he was good at fighting. Wild is very good. It's just that he's been restricted by the barbarian king, said Prince Yen. Ning Chen's heart trembled. How did he know what he was thinking? This wasn't the first time. Could it be that there was still a mind-reading cultivation method in this world? Prince Yen didn't say anything else. He continued to walk forward step by step. He also didn't know what the current situation in the Great Xia was like. Ning Chen was worried. Ever since the two of them had come to this godforsaken place, they hadn't encountered a single person in a long time. In fact, let alone a person, they hadn't even seen a ghost. Perhaps they would only be able to ask about the situation of the two dynasties once they reached the Northern Meng capital. Hopefully, the Great Xia hadn't been destroyed yet. It wasn't that he didn't have confidence in the Great Xia. It was just that Fan Lingyue was too scary. And since he hadn't died, it was very likely that Fan Lingyue wouldn't die either. How could a peak 9th grade martial artist be killed so easily? Fan Lingyue was too patient. She could use anything to scheme against him. If it wasn't for the heavenly book protecting him, he would have been killed before the gunpowder could explode. Of the 2 pages of the heavenly book, Fan Lingyue had shattered one, and the gunpowder had shattered the other. It was now hanging above his chi si in a mess. It looked like it would be very difficult to recover. After leaving Sword City, the senior had already told him that the life scroll in his hand was a heavenly book. Moreover, it was the beginning of the heavenly book. At that time, he was very surprised. Later on, he didn't think much of it. Now, after being saved by the heavenly book, he realized that this thing could also be used as a bulletproof vest and shield. He hoped that all the heavenly books in the world would be in his hands. His hopes were plentiful, but reality was harsh. The senior also told him that 2 volumes of the heavenly tomes had already fallen into the hands of the Eternal Night cult. Therefore, before he could voice out his wish, it had already been shattered. He had a good memory. The Eternal Night cult not only had 2 heavenly books, they also had 2 innate stage martial artists. Although he had died so many times without dying, he believed that if he didn't have eyes and went to the Eternal Night cult to snatch the heavenly book, he would definitely be beaten to death. Just by looking at the Eternal Night cult's Son of God, one would know how terrifying the experts in the Eternal Night cult were. Ning Chen and Prince Yen continued to travel north. Finally, 2 days later, they encountered a very large tribe. The tribe was very lively, as if there was some important activity going on. Prince Yen wasn't very interested, but Ning Chen was. He turned his wheelchair and went into the crowd. Anyway, the sword rack was still with him. Don't follow me if you dare. Disabled people would be taken care of no matter where they were. Ning Chen sat in the wheelchair and cut through all obstacles. He was invincible. In a short while, he was at the front of the crowd. Prince Yen followed him unhurriedly. Wherever he passed, the crowd unconsciously opened up a gap for him. After he passed, they squeezed tightly again. In the open space in front of him, a group of young men were struggling to snatch an embroidered ball. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched. He immediately knew what was going on. It was another one looking for a groom. Ning Chen moved his wheelchair slightly to the back of the crowd, using half of Prince Yan's body to block it. What he was most afraid of now was a groom search. Northern Meng's culture was very open. The groom sat on a high platform. She looked a little shy. She was very fair and beautiful. She's a good match for the senior, Ning Chen said secretly. This lady's dress showed that she wasn't an ordinary person. She must be the daughter of a high-ranking member of the tribe. The senior was so handsome, and the young lady was so beautiful. It could be said that they were a perfect match, a match made in heaven. While Ning Chen was lost in his thoughts, the young men in the open space in the middle were about to go crazy. Whoever had the embroidered ball would have a bloody nose and a swollen face in the next moment. Punching and kicking was not allowed, but it couldn't stop someone from playing dirty. There were so many people, who could see clearly who was playing dirty. There was a time limit for the groom search. It was impossible to let this group of young men fight endlessly. Time passed little by little. It was about to end. The embroidered ball was still flying in the air. It flew here and there, and then it flew to Ning Chen's side. Then it fell into Prince Yan's arms. Ning Chen was stunned. The lady on the high platform smiled. The crowd was boiling. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.